Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning. So we are meeting today to the Standing Committee of Industry, Science and Technology to study clauses 22 to 38 and 108 to 122 of Bill C-4, an act to implement the agreement between Canada, the United States of America, and the United Mexican States. With us this morning, we have Mr. Lawrence Herman, joining us video conference from Toronto. Good morning. We have Monsieur Mathieu Poirier from Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Mr. David Cassidy, Unifor Local 444, and we have Jonathan, I'm going to attempt to say your name, Azzopardi, from the Canadian Association of Mold Makers. Now, since we have a large panel, what we will do is ask that you each present for approximately 5 minutes. At the end of all of the testimony, we will then move into rotation for questions. So what we'll do is we will start with Mr. Herman, who's joining us from video conference, just in case we have a problem technical. We want to make sure we get your testimony on the record. So Mr. Herman, with that, please feel free to begin your testimony.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be able to provide some views. I should make it clear that I'm not representing any particular party, any particular interest. I've been asked to appear in my personal capacity. I'm a trade lawyer by profession, but I used to be in the old Department of External Affairs. I've been involved in international trade at the GATT, the WTO, Canada-US for many, many, many years, and I deal regularly every day on trade policy issues, so that's a little bit of my background. I'll be very brief. This is a bill to implement an agreement that has been concluded, signed and ratified by two parties, the United States and Mexico. It is now up to Canada to ratify this deal. The deal is done. It is not open for renegotiation. It is totally impractical to think that the United States Congress would be prepared to change anything in an agreement that they have approved and that the president has ratified. So what we're talking about here, and I think the committee understands this, is changes to Canadian laws to bring our laws, where necessary, into line with a concluded agreement. And when you look at the clauses that you are examining, you will find that they are consistent, at least in my view, they are consistent with everything that has been agreed to in the CUSMA. And so the task is to approve legislation, make some adjustments if necessary, and frankly, I don't think I see any areas where adjustments are needed, to bring our laws technically into line with what has been concluded in the trade agreement. As I said, the agreement in every practical sense is not on the table for renegotiation. So what is necessary on Parliament's behalf is to enact legislation that brings our laws, where necessary, into line with what's been agreed to with the United States and Mexico. Some of these adjustments are purely technical. They are nothing more than some moderate tweaking of Canadian statutes to comply with the agreement. There are some substantive provisions, as you all know, dealing with customs matters and tariffs and rules of origin, but that's something that we've agreed to, Canada has agreed to in CUSMA, and now it is up to Parliament to pass the necessary implementing legislation. One final word. If Parliament were to reject this bill or to refuse to approve the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, it would be unprecedented and, frankly, would set our economic, trade, and political relations back many, many years. It would be an astonishing result if Canada did not proceed with ratification. So those are my views.
Thank you very much. So next we will move to Monsieur Mathieu Poirier. And again, feel free to give any of your testimony in one of the two official languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here on behalf of Canada's 90,000 manufacturers and exporters and our association's 2,500 direct members to support Bill C-4, an act to implement the agreement between Canada, the United States of America, and the United Mexican States, also known as CUSMA. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the efforts of the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, Chief Negotiator Verhoeven, and all their staff for negotiating CUSMA. Being part of the process, we at Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, or CME, understand how difficult these negotiations were. It was crucial to achieve a positive outcome for Canadian business and all their employees, and we did just that. As such, CME fully supports this bill, and we urge the government and all parliamentarians to ratify CUSMA as soon as possible. My goal today is simple. I want to explain why free trade is important to manufacturing and how CUSMA will improve on NAFTA. So why is free trade so important? Simply put, North American trade is the basis upon which Canada manufacturing industry is built. Our sector alone employs 1.7 million workers in every community across the country. In 2019, we shipped $455 billion worth of merchandise exports to the U.S. and Mexico. This represented 77% of our total exports to all countries that year. 2/3 of these exports, worth about $305 billion, were manufactured goods. The numbers simply speak for themselves. You see, Canadian, American, and Mexican manufacturers don't really compete with one another. Rather, we build stuff together. A continental manufacturing ecosystem bound together by integrated supply chains. North American free trade is therefore a pillar of our national economy. It is why the manufacturing sector produces the bulk of Canada's exports, and it is how the sector can compete against the rest of the world. This is why CUSMA, and NAFTA before it, is so important. Without this agreement, and without integrated production with the US and Mexico, we simply would not have the scale necessary to be a global player. Canada's ability to take advantage of any other trade deal is only possible if North America continues to manufacture and grow. So how does CUSMA improve on NAFTA? CUSMA preserves the integrated manufacturing operations that allows the relative free flow of goods and services between our three markets. Going into the negotiations, our members made it clear that the primary objective of Canada must be to do no harm to this integrated manufacturing economy. CUSMA accomplished this. In fact, CUSMA preserves many of the key elements of the original NAFTA, which were targets of the U.S. for elimination. This includes dispute settlement mechanisms and the business traveler visa exemptions. This was by no means assured at the outset, but there they are, alive and well. Importantly, CUSMA updates critical areas of NAFTA, dragging it into the 21st century. This alone will significantly enhance North American trade. For example, the new digital trade chapter recognizes that the internet is a thing and establishes a framework for e-commerce in North America. The Customs Administration and Trade Facilitation chapter will also go a long way in modernizing borders throughout North America, enabling the free flow of goods. And lastly, Chapter 26, the new competitiveness chapter, has not garnered a lot of attention, but it is, in our estimation, one of the biggest accomplishments. Why? Well, it sets up a framework for 3 sovereign countries to become a unified trade bloc. It will do this by promoting better coordination and integration of our manufacturing industries so that it can tackle global trade challenges together. This is a significant accomplishment. We have consistently urged the government to start work on implementing parts of the agreement now, like Chapter 26, that do not require legal changes. We should be looking to make early progress by establishing committees for North American competitiveness and good regulatory practices as outlined in the agreement. This would show Canadian leadership, signal to our other partners that we take CUSMA seriously, and let us hit the ground running. Once CUSMA is the law of the land, we need to pivot towards helping manufacturers and exporters take advantage of the New Deal. The U.S. is and always will remain our largest export market. We must leverage the excellent government resources like the Trade Commissioner Service and Export Development Canada to help companies transition from NAFTA to CUSMA. Limited access to the U.S. government procurement market is also a big challenge. This is how government can play a positive role in helping companies capitalize on CUSMA once in force. Certainly. In the final analysis, CUSMA is a good deal for Canada, and given the very challenging negotiations and impressive achievement, thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poirier. I'll invite Mr. Cassidy now for your presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dave Cassidy. I'm the president of Unifor Local 444 in Windsor. Local 444 represents just under 10,000 active members working across a range of industries, including gaming, long-term care, aerospace, energy, transportation, and of course, auto assembly and auto parts. Our local represents approximately 6,500 workers at the Fiat Chrysler Windsor assembly plant, producing vehicles like the Grand Caravan, the Voyager, and the Chrysler Pacifica. We also represent thousands more workers at nearby feeder plants right down the supply chain. I want to thank you today for the opportunity to address you with respect to Bill C-4 in the implementation of the Canada-United States-Mexico Trade Agreement. As the committee members will know, our union and our national president, Jerry Diaz, took a very active interest in NAFTA renegotiations. I can tell you, coming from Windsor, that reopening or even getting rid of NAFTA has been top of mind for workers ever since that original deal came into force back in 1994. Now, I know the terms of NAFTA stretch beyond just the auto sector. It's a deal that touches nearly every goods and service that cross our continental borders. Yet among them, the auto industry seems to grab the headlines, and for good reason. Building and developing an advanced auto industry is lucrative business. It is also a tool for significant economic development. Canada is fortunate to have invested heavily in the auto sector. Every one job in auto assembly helps generate 10 others throughout the economy. An auto assembly plant is like a center of gravity for additional manufacturing investments. Supplier parts, whether seats, doors, wheels, or other components, are intentionally located nearby to help meet production schedules and demand. This is exactly the case in Windsor, where the auto industry is still a vital cog in the local economy. This despite years of devastating closures, plant reallocations, job outsourcing, and layoffs. In 1994, NAFTA changed the terms of trade and redefined the North American supply chain. It is no surprise that automakers and parts manufacturers started relocating production to low-wage Mexico, or in some cases, the low-wage U.S. South. We used to have a $3.5 billion auto trade deficit with Mexico for cars and parts. The deficit is now nearing $30 billion. We expected this would happen. This is part of the reason Canadian auto workers have been long opposed to NAFTA. Over time and through our collective bargaining, we've managed to secure decent wages and benefits for our members doing very difficult, repetitive, and skilled labor. But all that gets undercut as Mexican factories pop up and workers paid a wage that's a fraction of what we earn. I don't know if you know this, but a new Audi assembly plant located in Mexico, producing a 40,000 luxury SUV, for instance, will pay workers around $2.25 US per hour. Canadians workers will not and should not have to compete with that. I'll tell you, there is rarely a time when Canadian auto companies fail to point out these disparities, when they're trying to lower our wages, trim our benefits, or overhaul our pensions. This is NAFTA's effect on working conditions in Canada. Now, as I said, our union put a lot of time and resources engaging in NAFTA renegotiations and working with federal officials to make meaningful changes. No one was under any assumption that tinkering with NAFTA would, by itself, undo decades of damage and neglect. But certainly, meaningful changes were made, and we recognize that. Under CUSMA, there's now a much higher threshold to determine a North American-made car as compared to NAFTA. Giving tariff preferences to car makers that build a car actually made from North American components strengthens the integrity of the deal. This is far different than the approach the Harper government took when renegotiating the TPP, wherein they committed to weaken the NAFTA threshold. Under TPP, which Unifor strongly opposed, more than half of a car didn't even have to be built in a trade zone to receive tariff preference. It's good news that under CUSMA, the trend is reversed. We think this could help locate production of Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers into Canada as car makers attempt to meet the new rules. The CUSMA also strengthens rules of origin on key component parts over and above the original deal. For the first time, there are auto rules of origin that apply to steel and aluminum resources, requiring OEMs to purchase at least 70% of these materials in North America.
Your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you.
High labor. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out where I'm going to go here. I was told I had 10 minutes. That's why I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Okay. I'm sure that once we get into the questions, you'll have an opportunity to address and add some more comments.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
So in the CUSMA text, there's provisions that give automakers some reprieve from these labor rules. Certainly R&D spending, for instance, can help them lower the 40% commitment. Labor value content can be shaved down to governments like Ontario rather than work at cross purposes. Let's commit to comprehensive oversight of new auto rules to ensure things like the labor value content are being properly applied. And let's have this industry committee undertake a detailed study on the future of auto production. Let's fully assess the gaps in Canada's supply chain and its skills needed to lead the
Mr.
electric
Cassidy,
and autonomous vehicle transaction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation to
Thank
speak.
you. And what I'll do is when we're getting close to the 30 seconds remaining, I'll lift up this paper just to give you a cue.
Okay.
So the next presentation is from Mr. Azzopardi. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Jonathan Azzopardi, past chair of the Canadian Association of Mold Makers, current director of international affairs for the association, president of Laval, a mold and part manufacturer in Windsor, Ontario. Our association is 100 members, 216 mold manufacturers in Canada, 14,000 skilled workers, over 230 associate members, and over 1,400 companies just in southwestern Ontario alone in manufacturing. I have to start out by saying I don't admire the position that you're in. A committee that is asked to push through a ratification that's already negotiated, but trying to put the structure together to be able to create a net to be able to capture those opportunities is not an easy task to do. But it is necessary. We're here to support the ratification of this C4, or CUSMA. To be a manufacturer in Canada is not easy, but it is a privilege. It comes not without its many challenges. And I won't take my time to mention all of those challenges, but I will say that exporting, if you make things or grow things in Canada, are critical. I will take the 10 minutes to show you the ways that this agreement can help us and create a leverage or a springboard. 5 minutes. Yeah, I hear that. But I believe it is important that we start with a timetable. In 2015, Donald Trump, at the time president-elect, announced that he was going to renegotiate NAFTA. I have to admit that if you fast forward to 2016, where president-elect becomes president, it sends a shockwave throughout our industry. That shockwave, although it's uncertainty, real or unreal, caused a lot of disheartened workers and companies. At the time, our industry was under a great amount of pressure because it wasn't a fair trading relationship. Made in America was causing enough problems, not to mention 85% of our exports are going to the United States, already under pressure from low-cost countries like China, who do what we do at a fraction of our cost. Now, we do have the blessings that this agreement was negotiated quickly. I believe that our U.S. trading partner has made sure that the rules are in their favor. But dragging out ratification can only hurt us more, and we only lose more opportunities every day. Ratification, why is it important? Dispelling the uncertainty. You have to understand that we've been in this uncertainty since 2015, which is nearly 5 years, losing opportunities every day. You also have to understand that because of our cycles, that we won't see all of the bad news until for 5 years after ratification, because of our cycles and how our agreements are with our clients. The second reason that I want to talk to you today is that future investments in Canada because of this agreement will fall very heavily on tiers 1, 2, and 3. It's very important that you understand the further down the supply chain in the auto sector, the less likely that you have to be in the United States. By moving this agreement forward, all assembly factories, over $20 billion investment in the United States since 2016, will now become our new clients, if this ratification happens quickly. The second point, I represent the mold making industry, which is typically a tier 2 industry. This is very important. We must mirror our trading policies with our largest trading partner. For example, in December of 2019, 25% tariff was imposed on molds coming into the United States from China. This is an example that if Canada does not adopt mirroring policies, we will become a dumping zone for Chinese products. So it's important that stage 2 upon ratification is that Canada must adopt mirroring policies for US for steel, aluminum, and molds. Without doing this, without adopting these policies, you will begin to erode our manufacturing sector from the inside out. The last point that I'd like to make is that our vulnerability by CPTPP. Without the new CUSMA agreement, I'll agree with David, this agreement is a disaster waiting to happen in Canada. CPTPP has no apparent value for Canadian manufacturers without CUSMA. It will not help us, but actually hurt us, because we will become a dumping ground for companies wanting to gain access to the US. If Canada does not adopt strong RVC policies, it will be an opportunity missed, and actually we will actually lose ground. Canada needs to ratify CUSMA as soon as possible, create protective measures to protect against this dumping by mirroring US protective measures within their own country, so that we can actually take advantage of this agreement fully. Expanding the list of products and strengthening the methods of calculating RVC is one way of protecting this, mirroring trading policies with the US, and getting this agreement in place as soon as possible. I'm happy to answer all your questions and also actively play an active role in helping you to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we will begin our rounds of 6-minute questions. The first round going to Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I have a question for Mr. Poirier. And your organization had a press release on December 10th of 2019. And in that press release, you had stated that you were looking for a better understanding of the potential impacts of concessions on our aluminum industries. And since that time, would you say that your concerns have been addressed? And what can the federal government do to better address those concerns?
At the time of that release, we were, I think, with everyone sort of wondering what was going on because there weren't a lot of details out in the media. But now with the new, exigences put forward in NAFTA for steel and aluminum content in auto, that's certainly a win for the industry. And will hopefully bring back investment into Canada for those industries.
Thank you.
Do you want to share your time? You have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay. Yes, I'll share my time with her.
Thank you. My concern is, and I'll direct my question to Mr. Poirier. My concern is less with the fact that, I understand that there's a greater degree of benefit to Canada on this agreement, but more this just the lack of information in terms of long-term economic impact. We've seen reports recently in a few days, especially the C.D. Howe Institute and others, that perhaps this will have long-term detrimental impact. And I also saw a quote from Jared Kushner earlier this month talking about the fact that the sunset clause and basically the re-review clause would allow for the United States to exert leverage. Are you concerned at all that that particular provision is going to perhaps chase away long-term investment in Canada, given that 6 years is barely a blink of the eye in terms of investment? Perhaps maybe not in your industry, but in industries where we're dealing with intangibles such as data or intellectual property.
A few thoughts on that. You're right. I think that, having a review mechanism is good, but the 6-year timeline is pretty short. And what we just got over with the negotiation, what we learned is that once we're renegotiating, there's all this uncertainty that hits the market. And where does the investment go? Well, to the safest harbor, which is typically the United States and not Canada. So that's a concern. But that said, this negotiation was a fight for dear life to try and maintain the basic access that we had to that market and all the protections in NAFTA that we currently enjoy. So given that that was what we were up against, where we ended up is pretty good. So, you know, that the thought about, you know, the renewal and the uncertainty every 6 years notwithstanding, it's where we could have ended up, which would have been really bad for the industry. We're pleased with what it is. So under that alone, we're very supportive of
Sure.
CUSMA.
So would you characterize this as less of a victory and more of a concession that allows us to continue the status quo-ish?
Yeah. Well, the status quo, what we maintained on the status quo is a victory for sure. But also all the new chapters that we're doing, the modernization of the agreement, that's stuff that was long overdue and that we got in this as well. And I'm thinking particularly the competitiveness chapter, right? That's something that's specific for manufacturing that will let the three countries act as a trade bloc. That wasn't in there before, and that's something that has a lot of potential going forward. So yes, we maintain, but also we got a lot of new good stuff as well.
Sure. I'm sitting at the table and we've got, very important sectors of the economy represented here today. But I'm also, questioning what our economy looks like 10 years from now, where intangibles, your industries represent, production of tangible goods, right? Matthew, or Mr. Poirier, did your industry liaise with any associations or did any of your member associations sort of talk about the fact that intangibles might be, and data, IP, et cetera, might be at threat under the way that this agreement has been negotiated, especially given the 6-year renegotiation clause?
Well, certainly for manufacturing, it's a win, this agreement. Other sectors have concerns, and we share those as well, just from a general business perspective. But the way we look at it is that where this could have gone and what stability it returns to the market is a good thing. Other than that, based on those merits alone, I mean, we can always be concerned about the other issues that are plaguing investment in Canada in general. And we could sit down and have a long discussion about all of those. But what we have within our control, that is this trade agreement and passing it to remove at least one level of uncertainty, we should do it. Everything else that we can't control beyond our borders in terms of economic challenges, let's park that. But we can control this.
Just to follow up on that, because I'm running out of time. Do you think that the 6-year provision?
That's the time.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we move to Mr. Assassi, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question would be for Mr. Herman. First of all, thank you very much for appearing before our committee. You come at this with a wealth of experience, so we're very grateful that you made yourself available. Mr. Herman, on several occasions you emphasized that this deal is concluded, signed, and ratified. And you did say that the deal is done, that it's essentially a fait accompli. Now, for the sake of my colleagues, would you explain to us what would happen if any amendments were proposed? Would we not risk losing all those hard-fought advantages that we gained during the negotiations?
Well, first of all, Mr. Assassi, in response to your questions, before you entered politics, you were in the trade law field, and you and I know one another from days gone by when we were both practicing international trade, so you have an expertise as well. Let me say this, that the bill that you are examining, particularly the clauses that you're looking at, are in line with the negotiated agreement. Parliament can look at implementing legislation and can tweak or make modest changes where necessary to adjust the legislation so that it complies with the negotiated agreement. Were Parliament to make changes to the bill that were inconsistent with the negotiated agreement, Canada would not be in a position to ratify. Canada can only ratify an international treaty, which this is, when it is in a position to fully comply with the provisions of that treaty. If changes were made to the bill that were inconsistent with what Canada has concluded, signed, not yet ratified, Canada could not, the government of Canada could not ratify. If the bill were rejected, Canada could not ratify. The committee has to consider the implications for non-ratification of an agreement that was painstakingly negotiated under very difficult circumstances and that has been approved by the U.S. Congress through all of those machinations that you all know about, and has been signed and ratified by the President of the United States. Look, it would be unprecedented in Canadian history, unprecedented, I have to emphasize that, for a trade agreement to be refused by this committee or by the House of Commons or by Parliament in general. It has never happened. It would be an astonishing result, and it would negate, in my view, not only our trade and economic relations with the United States, but long-term political relations with that country. And it would put in doubt the future of the NAFTA, because without this trade agreement, we'd be relying on the NAFTA. Whether the NAFTA would survive if Canada did not ratify this agreement is doubtful. Those are my views.
Thank you. Now, another question. In the event we were not to ratify this, am I correct in assuming that the United States and Mexico could proceed without us?
Yes, they could, and I believe they would. It is in the interest of the United States to conclude a deal with Mexico because of the provisions that Mr. Cassidy outlined in terms of increasing U.S. content in auto productions and disciplining the Mexican side in terms of auto production. The U.S. and Mexico could, and I believe they would, leaving Canada very much out in the cold and putting the future of our trading and political relationship at great risk. There should be no doubt about that, Mr. Assassi.
If I could turn to Mr. Poirier. At one point during your testimony, you emphasized, and I quote, "We were part of the process." Were you satisfied with the consultations that were taking place between the government and your organization during the year that we were renegotiating CLEMSA?
Yeah, we were very we deserve to have a seat at the table when we're talking about manufacturing and trade. Just by the sheer number of jobs that the industry represents. But I think so, and at some point we're cognizant of the fact that the government has to, simplify the task and actually go and negotiate the deal, and that's only a few people that can do it at that point. But in the process leading up to that, we felt that we were adequately consulted, certainly part of the process, and I know that a great number of other groups as well, not just business stakeholders, but from society, felt that they were more included in this agreement as well. So,
thank you, Mr. Cassidy. You also indicated that that Unifor did pour a lot of resources into these renegotiations. Were you satisfied with the consultations?
Yeah, listen, we were part of the discussions, and Unifor welcomed, obviously, NAFTA's renegotiation. Myth obviously perpetuated, in the business world that NAFTA is too delicate to touch, and that's why it was very important to us. But that was baloney, to tell you the truth, that NAFTA was too delicate to touch. We had an opportunity at the time, and we were very happy that we were there and being part of that solution where we are today.
Thank you.
have. La prochaine question, c'est pour Monsieur Lemire.
The next question is for Mr. Lemire. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mr. Herman. You mentioned the importance of ratifying this agreement as quickly as possible, because otherwise parties can find themselves in a disadvantageous position. Now, will it be possible to protect the aluminum industry by harmonizing Canadian legislation, and how?
En ce qui concerne
Merci.
With regard to aluminum, in this agreement, there is a certain level of protection, which is significant for the aluminum sector. With regard to the melted and poured question, I'm sure you are aware of that, Mr. Lemire. There is an agreement with the Americans to revisit that question within the next few years. I think that in this case, the aluminum sector is well protected, but we will have the opportunity to reopen the issue of melted and poured within the next few years. And that is a key result for the sector, especially the Quebec aluminum sector. Another question on that, this time for Mr. Azzopardi. When it comes to manufacturing, what are the impacts? When you compare the impacts on the steel and aluminum sectors, in manufacturing, what are the effects of this agreement on production and supply?
The effects that the production and supply on this agreement, as long as they go into finished goods, I believe it will help. When we're using Canadian or U.S. aluminum or steel into finished goods, I believe that the agreement has lots of opportunities. From a raw product standpoint, I believe that the agreement has good provisions, but I don't necessarily think that the government at this time can uphold those provisions when it comes to RVC. We have a concern that steel and aluminum dumping will still continue as long as Canada does not adopt stronger measures to be able to protect against that dumping from low-cost countries. There are examples already that Canada is a country that is receiving those products, that RVC isn't necessarily being calculated correctly, and we believe that this is an area that should see some focus after the agreement is in place.
Donc, je comprends qu'il y a une...
If I understand correctly, there's a difference between steel and aluminum when it comes to the origin and the parts. We've heard a lot about the 70%. So with aluminum, 70% of aluminum, there's a difference between that and parts. Can you recognize that?
We recognize that very much so. The raw product itself has one classification, but it changes classifications once it becomes a fabricated product. The way in which you calculate the regional value content is what's very important. It's very easy for a manufacturer, let's say from a low-cost country, to establish themselves in Canada and make minor adjustments to that product and call it Canadian origin. What we're suggesting is that Canada adopt a more long and more well-detailed list of products and a more defined way of calculating regional value content, and then actually putting in a stronger methodology that manufacturers would use that to be able to strengthen the ability to stop, let's say, countries like China dropping in product and simply making small adjustments and changing the value. This is an area that we would actively participate in from this point forward to help the government actually help with those products on an individual basis. But it is definitely an area that we're seriously concerned about because in the past, this has been taken advantage of by low-cost countries.
Merci. Monsieur Poirier.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poirier, do you speak French? Yes. You fought many battles on the Buy American Act. As Canadians, wouldn't it have been better in some ways to use a similar protectionist strategy?
For the manufacturing industry, simply because it creates this bizarre situation where if one side implements Buy America and you don't retaliate in kind, it creates the incentive for business to locate in the jurisdiction where they can have access to both markets and not the other way around. So we have always been a strong proponent for free trade, for free and open markets. But if one side's not playing fair, it's incumbent upon us to respond in kind. So certainly we would have loved to see more access to the government procurement market and start to crack down those Buy America and Buy American provisions. We understand that it was a difficult negotiation. However, that's something that the government and all parliamentarians should be working to increase that access, because that government procurement market is huge to be able to increase the growth of Canadian manufacturing if we can tap into it.
Merci. J'ai le temps peut-être d'une dernière question rapide, Monsieur Cassidy.
One last quick question, Mr. Cassidy. I know that Unifor is also involved in the forestry sector. You didn't mention it in your presentation, but do you feel that this may settle the softwood lumber issue?
Yeah, I have to defer that question. I mean, I'm not well versed enough in the softwood lumber.
Okay,
Auto is my baby.
Prenez une chance, mais ça m'intéresse. Merci.
Thank you very
I was just taking a chance, but it's interesting.
much. Questions will go to Monsieur Mercier.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for our guests for being here. Quickly to Mr. Azzopardi and Mr. Cassidy. There's been a lot of auto investment in the last 20 years, just not in Canada. Detroit is up to $16 billion with the recent investments in the last 5 years. In Ontario was at $6 billion for the last 5 years. And I just want to give a chance to highlight, I know Mr. Azzopardi, you mentioned a couple things, but what more can be done? I'm fearful that the impression is that if we just sign this agreement, there are labor and environmental improvements that will allow our workers to compete more fair than before. But if we just leave it for this agreement, I'm concerned about our future. And so perhaps maybe you can outline a couple things that we might need to do. And speaking of reciprocity, Mr. Cassidy, you might want to raise the issue with regards to Michigan and the United States single events sports betting, where thousands of jobs are at risk as well, too, because we won't have reciprocity with the products that they have over there. So Mr. Azzopardi first, please.
I think the question, for a long time, I've tried to answer that question with both sides, from the OEM and from the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 level. Recently, I've changed my viewpoint in saying that they actually have to be broken apart, because they're two different strategies entirely. Tier 1s, Tier 2s, and Tier 3s need to adopt more advanced manufacturing, which means they need to compete. That will help to grow that sector. I believe this agreement will actually help us to be able to strengthen those relationships because of the supply chain integration we already have. Parts, and this is no joke, will cross that border 7 times between the Tier 1s, Tier 2s, and Tier 3s before they even get to an OEM. So the investment that you make in that lower tier is actually exponentially growing because we have access to all the OEMs. I believe this is actually the area that Canada can grow the most. The effect that a dollar from the government dropping into these lower sectors is actually multiplied by the fact that we have access to all of these investments in the United States. Investing in an OEM is good and shouldn't be abandoned, don't get me wrong, but they're only one brand. I have access to 44 different brands. So it's a huge opportunity in that lower sector. So the strategy needs to be different. We've been trying to attack the strategy the same for both, and they're actually different. We need to adopt more advanced manufacturing to make us more competitive. We need to adopt more manufacturing foreign trade policies so that we can take advantage of more markets using the U.S. as a springboard. That's how you grow manufacturing in Canada in those lower tiers. OEMs are actually a simpler but more complicated solution. They're looking for at least good fair market access, which is more trade agreements, but they're also very cost sensitive. And there are some more difficult questions that I don't think this committee is prepared to answer to be able to make those decisions. But I believe at some point, an adoption of a manufacturing policy that includes all aspects, advanced manufacturing, energy, labor, trade, is how you attract OEMs.
Okay, thank you. To Mr. Cassidy, that sounds, and for my wood pushing is a national auto strategy, but to Mr. Cassidy?
Well, I mean, just, when the announcement came relative to General Motors, and here we are, General Motors was beefing up in Mexico at the same time with the trade. When you go to the cheapest facility or place you can, right across the ditch from us in Windsor, I mean, there's 5,000 jobs being added to FCA today. And in my facility, the Windsor Assembly Plant, we're potentially losing 1,500 OEM jobs, which obviously would be devastating to Windsor-Essex County, into our auto parts and so on and so forth. As I said, 1 to 10 jobs in the economy. So it's very important that we do the investing and continue to do investing. And I think with, CUSMA, with, even if you look around the yellow unions in Mexico, I mean, it's an opportunity that you can bring up that skilled labor and where that number is. The $16 an hour, as they talk about in the trade agreement, is, I think it's a little bit fictitious to the fact that they're going to go from $2.25 to $16 an hour, when in fact they will at least be provisions there that they'll be able to check on it, as the old NAFTA didn't have that opportunity. But it's so important that we get into the, there's technology that can be done around autonomous vehicles, obviously the R&D, batteries. I mean, our facility builds the only Canadian-made minivan that there is as far as the hybrid. And here we are, a Canadian-made vehicle with the hybrid, and we can't get batteries. We got to reach out and get batteries from China, if you can believe it. And that's a problem. But you mentioned one last thing, Brian, on the single sports betting. If I could just,
Yep.
That has been around for a decade. That with us relative to jobs in Windsor and Essex, I represent the Caesars Windsor folks, 2,600 members there. This just in that facility will add 150 jobs, which is important. We're missing the boat again, because Michigan and New York and other states have already moved this forward. And if we can get this single sports betting, it's very, very important for all of us in Canada. So I just hope that, fingers crossed, this government, I know we're not talking about that here today, but I had to make sure that I got, thank you for lobbying that one out there and me hitting the ball out of the park. So thanks, Brian.
Yeah, just so members, it's actually, it is important, because we are talking about equality and reciprocity. The United States is moving ahead with single event sports. Actually, around $10 billion goes to the underground economy in Canada. It's thousands of jobs, not only just in our district, but across this country. And it's tens of millions of dollars to provinces on a monthly basis. And right now, so we're hoping to get that changed. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. That completes our first round of questions. We do actually have some time to actually move into the second round of questions at 5 minutes each. And to begin, we will have Mr. Dreeshen from the Conservative Party.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And of course, one of the things we're talking about, Canada as a country. Quebec, is really pushing the fact that it has the green and aluminum and so on, and the concerns and issues that we've talked about there. One of the things that we look at is the Chinese aluminum being stockpiled in Mexico, and the issues about what that is. And I think really that's been a critical component of this. And I believe, Mr. Azzopardi, you were talking about, is it molded? What percentage is coming in what area? So I think that's really an issue that is important. Also was mentioned the 25% tariff U.S. on China and the effects that had and how that kind of pushed us into a situation where we all had to kind of pay attention to what was taking place. But I just want to take it in a different direction for a moment. We produce a lot of coal in Western Canada and the Northwest U.S. It goes through the port of Vancouver and then heads over to Asia, where it is then being used to create steel, which then comes back and then becomes part of this problem that we have. No carbon tax associated with that. All that we see are problems as far as dumping is concerned, and I think really that becomes a critical aspect of this. Is how then do we ever expect that we are going to be competitive under those circumstances? And when we see some of the other things that are happening, with some of the review provisions that we have, are we expecting that we're going to be able to have an easier time to get foreign direct investment coming here into Canada unless we're paying attention to all of the of those micro issues that I've just mentioned?
Well, I'm glad that you brought it up, because we've seen it as well. We've been seeing it for steel for many years. Aluminum is obviously becoming more popular, so we're seeing it more in aluminum. If this was a panel of Mexican government officials, I'd be saying exactly the same thing. That unless they actually start to pick up the protectionist measures that the United States is picking up, you will also be the weak link in North America. You have to You have no choice. Unless you want to let the erosion continue, you must take on the same policies as the U.S. It's so important. We see it on the ground level all the time. The fact that China has the ability to be able to move product inside Canada, they're using investments to do that. I mean, I'll be totally honest with you. Since the agreement has been under question, then negotiated, and being ratified, we've actually had more investment opportunities in Canada. The problem now is you need to filter out those opportunities. Are they going to benefit Canada or are they going to hurt Canada? A lot of the opportunities are just so they have drop zones, and we're watching those very closely. Those should go away. On the other hand, I've also had investments from other countries who want access to the United States through Canada. So those investments, we obviously want more of those. The way that we filter those out, we can only do so much at the ground level, and we're trying. But the government actually has to give us the teeth, to arm us with the ability to be able to stop those. It is so critical. This is nothing new. I'll be honest with you, Minister. It's not new, but it will continue. And actually, this is where the provisions in the agreement can hurt you and help you. Right now, they will help us if we can stop it from happening. If we don't put those measures in, those RVC increases that Mr. Cassidy David talked about will start to play against us very quickly. Once they're in place, it'll be very hard for us to change them. And I actually have a grave concern if this doesn't happen quickly that they will already be in place. And then you'll be trying to push them out instead of stopping them from getting in.
Well, thank you very much. And of course, that's one of the key parts, as I mentioned before, about the Quebec green aluminum because of the way in which they are able to use their electricity, which of course try to build a dam now. I think it would be a little trickier, but I think that's my other concern as far as our oil and gas industry is concerned. We have sections of this country that talk about how great they are doing. There's also some amazing things that are happening in our oil and gas industry, and unfortunately, we don't seem to be able to move that forward. So my concern is, of course, when you're talking about foreign direct investment, it's going to find its place. But I really believe that when you have the best technology in the world, that should be the one that is being used, and that's. Mr. Poirier, we only have a few seconds left. Could you perhaps comment on the aluminum portion that I had mentioned before?
Well, just in the sense of investment, right? Like we can control trade, and that would be good. But we have a lot of other problems to fix in terms of making Canada a competitive jurisdiction to do business in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And the next round of 5-minute questions will go to Ms. Lambropoulos. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to first thank all of the witnesses for being here on such short notice and for providing us with your testimony today. And while I have questions for all of you, obviously due to time constraints, I'm going to stick to some of the most important ones. So, Mr. Azzopardi, you stressed the importance of ratifying this agreement as soon as possible, and you stated that there would be grave consequences and that every single day that we don't sign this or that we don't ratify this agreement, there are consequences. Can you speak a little bit more to this?
Yeah, what I'm trying to highlight there is that we're not a purchase order type agreement type manufacturer, right? It's not a purchase order we produce and it leaves. They're 5-year agreements. So if one of my members receives a purchase order from the United States, it's for 5 years. If somebody in the United States receives that same purchase order, it's also for 5 years. So that opportunity will not come back to a Canadian supplier or manufacturer for at least 5 more years. So every day that we wait, that 5-year clock doesn't start counting. We've already lost many opportunities over the last 5 years already. Those are already gone. That's water under the bridge. But if we continue to lose these opportunities, there are great opportunities that are happening in the automotive space alone with autonomous vehicles and electrification and the structure that supports those opportunities. If we're not in place now, you have to wait 5 years before you get your shot at it again.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And Mr. Cassidy, you spoke about how the NAFTA...
That is all the time that we have today for our first panel, but we'll make sure that next panel will be able to get some more time on there for you. I want to thank the witnesses again for your time here today. Merci beaucoup pour votre présence ce matin.
Thank you very much for being here this morning and for your testimony.
In the second panel of witnesses, thank you so much. Merci. Second panel of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. The subject matter is to study clauses 22 to 38 and 108 to 122 of Bill C-4. With us today, we have Monsieur Roger Boivin, Président du Groupe Performance Stratégique.
President of the Groupe Performance Stratégique, welcome.
Manufacturing. Mr. Marc Nantais, Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, and by video conference we have Jennifer Mitchell, President, Red Brick Songs from Casablanca Media Publishing. Welcome. So how we will do this is that each witness will have 5 minutes to present, after which we will move into questions. When you see the little paper move up, that means you have 30 seconds. If you could kindly wrap it up. I will try to allow as much time as possible, but our time is tight this morning. With that, we will begin with Jennifer Mitchell joining us from Toronto by video conference, so that in case we get cut off, I'd like to make sure that we have her testimony on record. Welcome. Oh, we may need to come back to you. So we're just working on some technical issues. So we will start with Monsieur Roger Boivin. Vous avez
You have 5 minutes, Mr. Boivin. Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for having invited us here today. And thank you for your interest in the aluminum industry. I am here to speak to you about the aluminum industry. I come from the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, and we have the largest concentration of aluminum smelters in the world. We have a production of 1 million tons out of the 3 million tons that are produced in Canada, and Canada is the third producer of aluminum in the world that has the lowest carbon imprint. We have a company called Rio Tinto that bought Alcan in 2007. There was a project called AP60, and the idea was to complete a smelter in Alma. This summer, they had commitments with the government to achieve those projects, and Rio Tinto is the trustee to carry out those projects. And so in July 2019, Rio Tinto re-signed the agreement with Alcan to 2025 to achieve those projects. But 3 months later, in October, there were announcements of $300 million going to be spent in Alma and AP60. And then in October, Rio Tinto said, well, with the new provisions of CUSMA, we are suspending our $300 million investment. So these are huge projects that have been developed over many years. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in order to produce the best aluminum possible. And because of the rules of origin in CUSMA, we're losing access to the American market. So the city of Saguenay, where we have those smelters, and in Alma, and the workers of Unifor and the metal workers that work in those plants, and the 4,000 people who work throughout the area in relation to the aluminum industry, looked at the impact if CUSMA were to continue as it is. It would have an impact on the creation of these new projects that would provide 850 million tons of aluminum that would have a positive impact on greenhouse gases relative to the Chinese production. We produce less greenhouse gases because we rely on hydroelectricity, both in Quebec and in BC. But we would create $6 billion odd dollars of investment in Quebec. There are expansion projects that were allowed for in Alouette, but that have been suspended. We had spent $500 million in a feasibility study. So all of these projects have been suspended. And so this industry is tremendously concerned about this. The world is very complicated, as you know, but this industry is able to navigate this complex world. But now there is a clear access of a clear possibility of not having access to a market because of proceeding through Mexico, because that aluminum could go through Mexico and arrive in North America in light of the rules of origin that apply in CUSMA. And so as a result, when we talk about this, we're talking about an industry that's tremendously important for us. And as you've seen, the president of the association says that we support the agreement but it means that we do have an agreement, but then he referred to the 12 things that are missing in the agreement that have led to suspension of projects. So we have to close that door in Canada's national interest. And I'll conclude on this point. We're open to the world. We trade with the English, the French, and Americans, and we are a trading nation. It's clear, and we're in favor of trade, but we're in favor of fair trade. We come from North America, where we had Alcoa, which and then there's Rio Tinto, that is a company. But throughout the world, it's not companies that are producing aluminum. It's governments that have political interests, whether it be in India, Brazil, and China, that are using aluminum and are doing dumping. And we have aluminum that is based on economics, whereas they have aluminum based on politics. And we can't compete with the governments from Dubai that is cutting the costs. So that's why we have to regulate the market access in the area of aluminum, as our president supported. And this is what we would support as well.
Some technical difficulties on the moment, so we'll move now to Mr. Smith. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm prepared for 10, but I'll do it in 5. I'm Scott Smith, and I have the privilege of representing 160 employees of Honeybee Manufacturing. I have with me Jamie Pegg, our general manager. We want to thank you for this opportunity to discuss these matters regarding specifically issues on the competition and copyright acts that are addressed by this committee. We manufacture and have for over 30 years, since 1979, agricultural equipment that attaches to major brands of OEM equipment like John Deere, Case New Holland, AGCO, and so on. We export our products. I would say 40% of our output is consumed in Canada, and 66% is for export, and 33% is export to the United States. So we're dependent. We have about 26 different countries that we are exporting to. But we face a challenge, and the challenge that we face is interoperability. Recently, and with technical protection measures and so on, companies have started to use digital locks and keys to prevent us from allowing our equipment to interoperate with these major OEM brands. It's a form of protectionism that allows them to own and operate the entire value chain at the exclusion of independent manufacturers. In Canada, we have 1,400 manufacturers of implements that are attached to either agriculture, mining, forestry, or construction equipment, and 500 of those manufacturers are for agricultural equipment. That agricultural equipment is primarily manufactured adjacent to small communities in Canada, rural communities, where the majority of that type of manufacturing takes place. So it's a challenge for us to achieve the ability to continue legally to manufacture a product and sell it onto these platforms. The Copyright Act in the United States has provision for circumventing for the purpose of interoperation. The Canadian Copyright Act does not have the same term in the agreement. We would like to see that ratified prior to the signing of the trade agreement so that we're not on that uneven footing that prevents us from competing legally in the marketplace here and abroad. The combines that we manufacture our equipment for are the same combines that are sold everywhere in the world. There's no variation. So a blockage here in Canada blocks us globally. That represents about $3.1 billion a year, $2.1 billion a year of exports on agricultural equipment from Canada, and about 1.9 billion of that is to the United States. So if we don't have opportunity to interoperate with the American platforms, which are the global platforms in this instance, it has a very serious impact on our communities. We employ 160 people in a town of 300. Our employees come from an area that's about 100-kilometer radius to the east, west, and north of us, with Montana on our back doorstep. Our employees come from all over the world, including Syria, Germany, Venezuela, and India, as well as locally. A lot of our employees are 4- and 5-generation farmers' children, and this is something that we don't want to see die. It would be devastating to our communities. So at a minimum, we need to have a copyright clause that's the same as the U.S. clause that allows for the exclusion or the exception for interoperability adaptations. These types of adaptations are very expensive, and we would have to do it for every single platform. So the preferred solution is, in the long term, a mandated legislation that ensures that equipment imported into Canada has open interoperability rather than custom reverse engineering. For an example, on one product, it cost us between $800,000 and $1 million to reverse engineer and create a workaround solution, which is complete parallel systems, to allow our equipment to interoperate with the OEM equipment. The OEMs have not provided ease of access to this interoperability, and the issue hasn't been a problem in the past. It's been straightforward, like plugging a keyboard into your computer. But as they go to these digital locks and keys, we're seeing already on several platforms where they've locked it down so that we have to have their permission to do it. And when they do give us permission and do provide provision for our equipment, they then say, but we are restricted to only selling this product to this market for this customer and no one else. So that's not acceptable. So that's what we're looking to deal with here today. You have our full comments in the papers that we distributed, so we can review that at a later date.
Thank you very much. We will now move to Monsieur Nantais for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, honorable members. I'm very pleased to have received this invitation to be here today representing Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors of Canada. Our members operate 4 assembly plants as well as engine and component plants. They invest billions of dollars in the development of zero-emission technologies and advanced vehicle safety technologies. We have about 1,300 plus independent dealerships right across Canada and contribute to quality employment opportunities for over 500,000 Canadians. Passage of the CUSMA is essential to provide certainty to the North American automotive manufacturers. The automotive provisions, as well as the side letters that provide protection from U.S. Section 232, tariff actions are critical elements to support automotive manufacturing competitiveness within the North American trade bloc. It's important to remember that for the auto sector in Canada, the alternative to reaching this agreement was cancellation of NAFTA, reimposition of tariffs on finished vehicles and parts, and likely Section 232 tariffs on production material inputs. If we are anxious to see the final ratification, that is indeed why. So again, we want to thank the Canadian negotiating team for working so closely with us throughout the duration and ultimately ensuring we maintain Canada's auto sector as an integrated part of the North American industry. This agreement was simply existential to Canada's largest manufacturing and export industry. The agreement reinforces the long-established integration of the industry supply chain, which is absolutely necessary for its competitiveness and the ongoing need for continued regulatory alignment of vehicle technical regulations with the U.S. that are integral to trade and the environment while ensuring greater consumer product choice and affordability. The auto portions of the new agreement, including the rules of origin and the labor value content provisions and the 232 side agreements letters, are something all our members support and can adjust over a reasonable period of time, so we will be compliant, enabling us to continue to enjoy duty-free access to the largest and most beneficial automotive market in the world. As far back as 1965 with the Auto Pact, Canada's automotive industry and its supply chains have become deeply integrated with the United States and over time with Mexico. Vehicles are built seamlessly on both sides of the border, resulting in deep integration, which has led to a more competitive Canadian auto industry, greater consumer affordable choice at affordable prices, and a strong North American trade bloc. When the original NAFTA came into force in 1994, it provided a foundation for a strongly globally competitive trading bloc. And you'll see I keep coming back to referring to it as a trading bloc, which is really critical. The geographic proximity of the three NAFTA partners, facilities with a multi-billion-dollar parts sector, and the just-in-time supply chains critical to the vehicle assembly operations in North America. It also created inherent transportation and supply chain logistics cost advantages. Today, the automotive industry represents the second largest Canadian auto sector with $54 billion in trade in 2019, which is about 92% of the total value which was shipped to the United States. The United States is our number one automotive partner, and it's absolutely critical that a trade agreement is in place to provide the foundation for Canadian automotive production and exports. We must always keep in mind that Canada is simply one-tenth of a complex, fully integrated, long lead industry. Multi-billion-dollar product plans and manufacturing investment plans generally begin over 5 years in advance of the start of production. Planners require regulatory certainty to make their decisions. They especially need for Canada to maintain fully harmonized safety, vehicle GHG, and criteria emission standards with the United States. This remains imperative if we are to continue to be part of this fully integrated, long lead, large investment industry. Put simply, we did not work this hard to modernize integrated rules trade in North America than to take our eye off the ball and drift away with unique or different regulatory directions. This could put us back to square one and leave us on the sidelines if we were to do so. So, Canada's officials must also maintain a high degree of engagement with their U.S. counterparts in the U.S. and Mexico as we go forward. We cannot relax our efforts to ensure that Canada is sufficiently competitive to win future manufacturing investments that anchor much of the Canadian auto supply chain. Canada must have a competitive, or more than competitive actually, costs of auto operation in Canada, including investment incentives, carbon costs, competitive labor agreements, taxes that keep pace with the U.S., competitive electricity prices, and a competitive regulatory burden environment. It's important to remember that the auto sector is going through one of the most dramatic periods in its 100-year history. We need to work closely with all levels of government. So we fully respect this committee's need to hear Canadians and to ask questions. And for 36 years now, I've been appearing before various House committees, and we certainly understand that, and we encourage you in terms of your mandate to make this happen. We worked with all parties over the last 2 years to discuss very complex issues involved, and we appreciate your interest in open dialogue. So I thank you again for this invitation, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nantais. Now we will go to Jennifer Mitchell and Maître Casey Chiswick by video conference in Toronto. You have 5 minutes to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and honorable members, for this opportunity. I'm here today with Casey Chiswick of Castles, who is external legal counsel both to Music Publishers Canada and to my companies. I've had the pleasure of owning and running a Canadian-owned independent music publishing business for almost 2 decades. I'm here to talk to you about the need to fully implement copyright term extension in accordance with the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement immediately, completely, and with no conditions. By doing so, small and medium-sized businesses in the music publishing sector and our songwriting partners are able to continue innovating, growing, and exporting songs to the world. Canadian music publishing is a $329 million industry, which grows every year because of innovative entrepreneurs who help create value from songs. In today's digital and globally connected age, songs, music, and culture have no boundaries, allowing many Canadian songwriters to achieve international success because of the scale of opportunity outside our country. The market in Canada is simply too small for songwriters and publishers to succeed only within our borders. So music publishers work hard and make investments to help songwriters expand and grow into international markets. In fact, 2/3 of music publishers' revenue now comes from foreign sources, which is a dramatic change from 2005 when only 1/4 was from these same foreign sources. The key to dealing with changes in technology has been our ability to expand globally. Music publishers use their relationships in other countries built over many, many years to create opportunities for songwriters to succeed. Music publishing is about championing a songwriter and a song through the lifetime of the writer's career and the song's copyright. We take a long-term perspective and we work a lot behind the scenes to create value. We are the songwriter's partner. We not only make financial investments in songwriters, we also invest time and leverage our relationships to evolve a songwriter's career. This means matching people like songwriter Gene O'Brien with partners in lucrative markets like Japan to co-write singles that are released by other artists or that are used in TV, movies, commercials, or video games. It means arranging co-writing opportunities for Dan Davidson in London, England, and China, and financing radio promotion. Those efforts led to a top 20 Canadian country radio hit. And it means taking a risk to sign emerging songwriter Tom Prabozhansky, who moved to Toronto from Thunder Bay. We invested in him to go to Los Angeles and Denmark to co-write. He released an EP under the name of Zansky, and we paid for his blog and playlisting promotion so that he was featured in Clash magazine and Earmilk and various Spotify playlists. We were able to take these risks and invest that money in Gene, Dan, and Tom, only because we could rely on the income of several songs for which my companies hold the copyright. These efforts were made possible by the value that we were able to create from songs like Imagine by John Lennon, What a Wonderful World, My Way, YMCA, Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones, Skinamarink by Sharon Lois and Bram, and even the theme to The Simpsons. Which brings us to today. I would like to thank the government for agreeing in CUSMA to extend the term of copyright in works by 20 years. It is critical, though, that this be implemented completely, immediately, and with no conditions, rather than wait the 30 months that is allowable under CUSMA. Bill C-4 would extend the term of copyright for a few works, anonymous works, certain audiovisual works, and so on. It would add an extra 5 years to the term of protection for performances and sound recordings, which was already extended in 2015, a welcome development to be sure. However, the bill would not finish the job. It would not extend the term of protection for musical compositions known as songs. On behalf of Music Publishers Canada and the songwriters and composers that I work with, I urge the committee members to amend Bill C-4 to align Canada with its global trading partners by extending the term of copyright protection for all musical, literary, dramatic, and artistic works right now, instead of using the 30-month transition period. Why is this important? Many works, will fall into the public domain in the next 30 months. That will affect creators and publishers' ability to reinvest in the Canadian economy. As I mentioned, many music publishing companies are small and medium-sized businesses that rely on steady income from hit songs to develop new talent. For a small business like mine,
Ms. Mitchell,
holding on-
unfortunately, that's the time that we have, but I'm sure that once we get into the round of questioning, you'll have an opportunity to add additional comments. And I know you've circulated a document to the committee members, which we all have in front of us. So with that, we will move to a 6-minute period of questioning from each party. So we will start with Mr. Patzer. You have 6 minutes to ask questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for being able to make it here on very short notice to be part of the discussion that we're having here today. My first question, I guess, would be for you, Scott. And first of all, I just want to point out again, thank you for just bringing up the point that agriculture manufacturing is such a vital part of rural Canada and just the employment opportunities and how it is a mechanism for small towns to remain viable because it's such an important social fabric of our communities. I'm just wondering, Scott, one thing you were talking about was the copyright laws that we have in Canada and what they have in the United States. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on what the difference between those particular laws and how they affect your industry are.
Yeah, so primarily the difference is that the U.S. Copyright Act or legislation has exemptions to prohibition to circumvention. Circumvention of people's intellectual property or their copyrighted material is illegal generally, but when an exemption is provided for the purpose of interoperability, it's very viable and important. It was originally implied or put into the Act with respect to handicapped persons or people challenged with physical disabilities. It required different keyboard input devices, and software had to be modified to allow these types of tools to be used. In our case, it's not necessary that we have this ability, but it's being decided by the OEMs that that's a requirement because they're closing off the ecosystem for open development. So historically, our products have, for 30 years, we just have a couple of wires we hook up and go. The technology that they're adding doesn't change the functionality of the equipment. It's just creating a digital lock and key so they can choose to exclude equipment. And so if we adopt the copyright legislation exemption that they have in the United States within Canada, it gives us the legal basis to make these adaptations without breaking the law. So that's not really ideal, as I said. That's a very expensive process to reverse engineer and to develop parallel systems, but it's a starting point and it's the minimum that we would like to see that's already established in the U.S. copyright legislation that could be transported into the Canadian legislation without argument from the U.S., without bickering about, this thing being added or whatever in advance of signing the trade agreement. The trade agreement is very important to us, but without this, we're dead. We actually can't interoperate with other people's equipment.
Yeah, for sure. So, if the clause goes into the Canadian Copyright Act, will it completely solve the issue, or is it just kind of I think you mentioned as kind of the starting point for it? But if you want to elaborate further beyond this particular exemption of the Copyright Act, what else needs to be done to further solve these problems?
So this gives us a legal basis to do what we would need to do for reverse engineering, but it's the most expensive path. For a single platform, it costs between $800 and $1 million to develop a full technical system that duplicates everything that the tractor systems already do, to plug in parallel and switch one in or out, depending if our product's attached or someone else's. This is not viable. The farmer doesn't want this. You don't want to hack your keyboard to pieces to plug it into your laptop, one wire by one wire, key by key. You just want to plug it in and have it work. So what's really required is some sort of mandate for open interoperability. And this impacts, like I said, construction, mining, forestry, and agricultural equipment. They're all in the same boat. So it's something that in the long term, we've been working with government over the last year through Global Affairs, ISED, Heritage Canada, Agriculture Canada, the Competition Bureau, trying to get resolution to this matter through existing legislation and channels. Our case with the Competition Bureau was just closed last week for lack of legislation to support the actions that need to be taken.
Yeah. Yeah, so with a trade deal like this, this is something that would definitely should have been further addressed, and we had a golden opportunity, I think, to have this addressed in it, and it appears that it wasn't.
It wasn't, and it should be.
Does any of my colleagues have any questions they would like to add?
Thank you. And I just have a quick question to Mr. Boivin. You had talked about suspending, $300 million worth of products or access to the American market. Unifor was here earlier. There was no discussion from them about any concerns, and I think that's probably where I'd like to start. When we see all of these projects that have been taken off of the table. One of the things that I had mentioned earlier as well was the stockpiling of aluminum in Mexico from whatever countries, and the concerns we have there. We also heard in the agreement, now Canada has 70%. I think it's 70% protection, where they had zero before. Back in 1994, we had 100%. Yes. I mean, because we were the ones that were supplying it. So I wonder if you could just make a quick comment on that.
Oui, bien sûr que historiquement, nous avions un...
Yes, historically we had protected access. But additionally, the aluminum sector has greatly developed elsewhere in the world over the last few years. Now, foreign countries want to export here, and that's possible, but when it comes to economic costs, well, the Canadian aluminum sector is already the one with the lowest production costs in the world, thanks in part to Kitimat and Rio Tinto in Quebec, and preferential tariffs for companies like Alcoa. We can handle competition, but the industry has developed for legitimate reasons. In Brazil, China, the Middle East, India, a huge aluminum industry. The head of the association was talking about 35 billion for a single company, and I have documents here. 100 billion for the total of Chinese companies with subsidies. These countries are doing regional development with their aluminum. It's legitimate, but it's not the same as our industry. I'm sorry, Mr. Boivin, that's all the time we have. Thank you. And that's what's changed and means that we need more protection.
You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their testimony here today and for being here on such short notice. My first question will be going to Ms. Mitchell. I know that you were cut off, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to finish what you were saying earlier, but I'd also like to point out that there was obviously the cultural exception, which was put into this agreement, which I'm sure affects a lot of the creators that you work with and that you represent. I'd like to know if you can speak a little bit to this as well in your comments. And to finish what you were saying with regards to copyright as well. I know that you appreciate the fact that we've protected for an additional 20 years copyrights, but you were mentioning something about the transition, and I'd like you to continue on that front.
Sure, thank you. Just to sort of finish quickly the points that I was making, I did want to say that waiting the 30 months to implement a copyright term extension for all classes of intellectual property, particularly when it comes to songs and musical compositions, will actually create more confusion in the marketplace. So my first point was that we risk stifling innovation and creativity, export potential and growth for small businesses, but we also risk creating more confusion. Commercial users who do license songs typically do so worldwide, which means that they need to get a license for the entire world. And having to basically remaining out of step with all of our international trading partners will continue to complicate licensing for users rather than providing any kind of relief. We also risk introducing even more complexity by extending the copyright term for some classes of intellectual property and not others, as Bill C-4 would do.
And the important thing to keep in mind is that this is an international issue at its very heart. We're talking about works by composers like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Duane Allman, the list goes on, falling into the public domain during that 30-month period that CUSMA allows for a transition. And, to the point of the cultural exemption, it's tempting to say, well, those aren't Canadians, so it doesn't matter. But it does matter because it's income from compositions by composers around the world that give Canadian publishers like Jennifer the revenue that they need to reinvest in the songwriters and the songs that she referred to in her initial testimony. So it really is a critical issue, and it's sort of baffling that the government would choose to wait another 30 months, allow hundreds or thousands more valuable compositions to fall in the public domain, never to be recaptured by publishers who rely on that revenue for their investment in Canadian culture.
Would any of you be willing to comment on maintaining that protection, because this is not something that was in the original CUSMA agreement when they began negotiations, but if you can speak to the importance of actually including that in there.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear the beginning of your question.
The cultural exception in the CUSMA agreement, does that affect your industry? I believe it affects creators of Canadian content and all of the cultural industry.
Yeah, it does, and it affects creators in a positive way. It's important to maintain the fidelity to Canadian culture that has allowed the Canadian music industry, among others, to thrive for the last 50 years. And so, preserving that protection in CUSMA and in its implementation is of course key. It doesn't, unfortunately, address the issue that we're here to discuss today, which is the implementation of term extension for copyright.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your answers. How much time do you have left, Madam Chair? Okay. So my next question will go to Honeybee Manufacturing. I know that you've proposed, certain changes, and obviously we heard even from previous witnesses that making many changes would not allow us to ratify the agreement, which would obviously have severe consequences on the Canadian economy, on many of the businesses that do business with the United States, and in general have a huge impact on job loss and everything. Can you maybe speak to why it's important that we do ratify this agreement, regardless of changes that need to be made? How would your company and would your workers benefit from this agreement being ratified?
Well, we're in support of the trade agreement as it's presented in the aspects. We manufacture all of our products from steel and aluminum. So all of our issues around the tariffs on that really hurt us over the last couple of years. The other issues with exporting our agricultural output besides our own products, but just in general, we've seen the value of a trade agreement and the importance of it. Our urgency on our aspect of it with the copyright legislation having to have this exemption included is that if it's not, this trade agreement doesn't matter at all to us and our communities.
La prochaine ronde de questions, c'est Sébastien.
And now, Sébastien Lemire, please. First of all, I have a question for Mr. Boivin. Thank you for being here. You mentioned a study with an impact of $6.2 billion in projects, which has now been suspended. This is a catastrophe for the Lac-Saint-Jean region. Please be brief. I have a whole bunch of questions. Yes, but we must remember that in that region, there's a producing role for the aluminum industry. Throughout the Côte-Nord region, the foundries, the processors, we're talking about a great many providers throughout Ontario and the rest of the country. It's a national producer. Well, yes, there's a significant impact on SMEs. Now, when it comes to all of the political dynamics around this signature, we have heard about compensation for the industry. And the industry is happy to hear that. Are you concerned that that money might be taken and invested in Mexico, for example, to build the factories because of Chinese dumping? Well, when we look at this $1.3 billion in compensation, is not necessarily paid by primary producers of steel. We're talking about SMEs, processors. They're the ones who are taking on the burden to provide $1.3 billion in steel and in aluminum. It would be, frankly, indecent that ultimately this money should end up in the hands of aluminum giants. Yes, they have their problems, but it's the SMEs that are really bearing the burden. So we really need to ensure that this $1.3 billion ends up in the hands of the SMEs who paid it. So you do recognize that the situation is causing great uncertainty. How can we help develop an industry like aluminum under circumstances of such uncertainty if no changes are made and if this agreement is ratified the way it is? The industry will become defensive. It will end up being a second or third tier industry. It won't disappear, but it will decline. It will become uncompetitive. Right now, it's an offensive industry. It's investing heavily in great projects. We need to do something not about legitimate aluminum from other countries. We're able to compete with that, but not subsidized aluminum. I mean, the situation with Mexico, it's ultimately the last straw. I mean, we're talking about the situation over 10 years without major investments, except defensive investments. I don't think that that's something that the industry can bear. I mean, this is the second biggest industry in the country. It's an extremely important industry, and it's creating excellent products globally. So it's important both for Quebec and Canada. Now, the review mechanism will take place over 10 years. Are there immediate measures that could be taken in order to attempt to save the agreement? Well, it's very important to handle the dumping issue. Of course, the Mexicans are reticent about this. When it comes to dumped aluminum, something should be done about it. When we're talking about illegitimate aluminum, we need traceability. That's what the aluminum industry asked for in its 7 or 8 points. We need to create a framework with the Americans and Mexicans. We need to closely follow the situation with dumping and the origin of this aluminum. And as the Conservatives also said, what really makes our aluminum outstanding is its low carbon emissions or content. We need to create new measures, perhaps a buy Canadian. We need to do more, as the president of the Aluminum Association was saying. We need to consider the low carbon content. We need to underscore that, because ultimately our aluminum is not valued any higher than really high carbon producing aluminum. So we need to do something to point out how excellent our aluminum is on that score. This does not only benefit Quebec and Canada, it benefits the entire world. Because after all, our industry is producing lower carbon emissions. We cannot allow aluminum to continue being produced at very high carbon emissions. That hurts the entire world. I think it's a real shame. I'm not trying to blame anyone, but to allow our industry to decline when it has such excellent results, we need more solutions to help our industry. We need to allow the companies to produce aluminum at a reasonable price. A last quick question. The industry's reaction was different from the reaction of workers in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region. What interests do you believe that the industry is seeking to protect? I'll try to answer. But it's a bit difficult. After all, the biggest shareholder in Rio Tinto is China Aluminum, which made 2 hostile share buys in the past, and Australia got involved as well. Australia's like the Canada of China. I mean, if we think we have a complicated neighbor, look at the situation of Australia. It's difficult for the industry because of these kinds of dynamics. Because Rio Tinto has such a close relationship with Chinese aluminum. Thank you. And now a quick question for Mr. Nanté. You mentioned the importance of signing this new agreement. Compared to the old NAFTA, do you feel that real progress has been made?
The progress, I think, lies in the fact that we've been able to preserve a 3-country approach to the agreement. That provides, I mean, without that, we will not be competitive as a bloc. Okay. Our supply chains won't be competitive if we don't have this. So, as I mentioned in my remarks, it's the consequences of not doing this that one really needs to be concerned about. So for our industry, we need to have this in place. We need it for our competitiveness. We need it to keep the anchor assembly plants here in Canada and across North America. Without it, there will be no supply chain as well. So whether it's aluminum, steel, or many of our parts makers, the agreement is really critical. But I will say this.
Unfortunately, that's your time. Perhaps the next round they'll ask you that same question. Next round of question is for Mr. Massey.
Mr. Notice, you can finish your go ahead, finish your. And there was no pun intended when you said the block.
Sorry.
Please
As a
finish.
trade block, yes.
Yes.
No, it's very. I will say this: that the trade agreement, despite there are opportunities for suppliers and so forth, indeed there are, over time, but it does not offer a guarantee. If we were to lose our anchor plants in Canada or across in the U.S. or Mexico even, the supply chain would be greatly affected, negatively affected by that. That's what I was going to say.
And the original deal, gets done, gets hung up in Congress when there's changes. I'm vice chair of the Canada-U.S. Parliamentary Association, so we were often in Washington during the throes of that. And there's been amendments to labor and the environment that got it through. Does your trade association support that? It appears that there's more consistency now for some issues that are creating complications for competition for Canadian workers. We heard a little bit from the labor side, but do those improvements, are they supported by the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association?
If you're speaking specifically about the labor value content aspects, provisions, yes, we are supportive of this as part of the overall package.
And with that, though, you also noted several things and challenges that we face as a country. I'm concerned that the impression is that if sign this agreement, if we do nothing else and we stop here, do you have what's your thoughts about, I guess, auto manufacturing in Canada? If we just sign the agreement and we continue to do it without doing with other issues, where do you think we'll end up?
I have very strong thoughts about this. We operate in a high-cost jurisdiction. So whilst we have the agreement in place, one needs to think about the overall backdrop here, which is the high sort of operational costs in this country. And if we do not address those and continue to show an effort to address those and actually make progress, then it'll come to a point in time where people will look at Canada versus other jurisdictions. How can we be relatively profitable? And I use the word relatively here because we can be profitable now, but it's really a question for future investment as to whether you can be more profitable than other jurisdictions. So you're always competing with other jurisdictions, and if we don't address local operational costs or other issues here, then we're no better off. So one needs to look at this whole thing in a very holistic manner on a continuing basis.
So about 5 years ago, Ray Tanguay was commissioned by the federal government to produce an auto report. He tabled that to the minister in Detroit, Michigan, and that, in your opinion, you mentioned in your remarks actually 36 years you've been appearing in front of committees. Do you think that enough of that report has been acted on, or is there still elements of that report that could be advanced for the auto industry and for Canadian manufacturing? Is the report too stale now, or are there still some chances in that report?
Well, the Call to Action 2 report has been updated. Driven to Win report replaces that. And that report outlines many different things that continue to be necessary. And I would suggest that we've probably made very little progress on many of those recommendations. And as recently as a couple of weeks back or 10 days ago, the Canadian Automotive Partnership Council met, and again, we re-emphasized the fact that those recommendations need to be pursued and implemented by government. And that includes regulatory cooperation. That includes continuing to align our technical standards with the United States, in addition to labor and skills and all those other things that are in that report. That's a very it's a evergreen report. And those recommendations are supported by the entire industry, whether it's industry, labor, government, and when I say government, I'm talking about the federal government, the Ontario government, and the Quebec government.
Yeah, because investments are happening. I see it across the river almost every month with regards to Detroit, and it shows that we actually do have a competitive workforce, because much of that workforce even is connected to my city of Windsor. So it's about having fair conditions. How much time do we have?
A minute and 40.
Okay, good. So, Mr. Boivin, you mentioned about the $1.3 billion, I mean, the tariff, with regards to that. Are there things that you can suggest with that tariff? I mean, if we don't refund that tariff or use it, it's just another tax. In fact, it's become an albatross around my local steel manufacturers and the Kona mold makers and others and so forth, especially. What I found is that many of the businesses gave up on bidding some contracts that they were actually, the profit margin was used up for borrowing for money owed from different suppliers because it took too long to get them it back. So is that the same experience you're facing, or?
Yeah. In aluminium industry, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So they just given up on some, even because it would be 3 to 4% in profit is tied up because some of the smaller ones are having a hard time borrowing money to carry over the cost of the. Okay.
And it's very important to. Sorry, excusez-moi. Il est vraiment important, je crois, de retourner.
It's really important to return this money to the relevant industry sector, perhaps through some kind of association or system, but we need to improve the competitiveness of our aluminum processes industry. The aluminum industry cares about fair play. We're not going to make money in the wrong ways. We're capable of succeeding on the markets, but we need clear and fair rules. And then we will succeed.
Roll that too. That's what's frustrating about it.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And now we will move into the second round of questions at 5 minutes. So the first round goes to Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question would be for Ms. Mitchell. So as we're looking at what's in CUSMA with extending the copyright terms to 70 years after an artist has passed, you have to question how this really allows for innovation and creativity within the industry. But what I would like to refer to is that this committee conducted a very comprehensive statutory review of the Copyright Act in the last Parliament, and very comprehensive in the way of 52 meetings and hundreds of witnesses and briefs and emails. And once you look through all of that communication, there does not appear to be an overall consensus or an agreement as to, from the artists and from people within the industry, how to move forward. And so I'm wondering if you can comment. I'll just give you one quote from a well-known author and composer, Bryan Adams, where he commented that extending the terms of the copyright would essentially enrich large firms or intermediaries without providing money to creators. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that comment and just really how this does overall help the actual creators themselves.
I think the issue that Brian raised is separate from the actual extension of the copyright term. But just to speak to Brian's issue for a second, the majority of agreements these days in 2020 that are negotiated between publishers and songwriters are fair agreements. They're more similar to partnerships where the songwriter and the publisher are both sharing in the publishing and are acting together as partners. Our interests are very aligned. And I do really believe that the paradigm that Brian was describing is an old paradigm that doesn't exist anymore. When I speak to my songwriters about these issues, we are always simpatico. We are always aligned. The issue of speaking to innovation that you first mentioned, the money that we get from having songs that are, steady hits, songs that are going to fall into the copyright domain, that's money that we use to take risks on new songwriters. So when I sign a new songwriter to a publishing deal, and we decide to split the copyright together, I'm then investing that money to send them to go on co-writing trips to other places in the world in the hopes that they're going to get those songs recorded by international artists. I'm spending money on their own artistry, on radio promotion, on them having the time to be able to write and create in the first place. And they're huge risks. They're big gambles. If I don't have profit from a reliable source of income, I won't be able to make those investments. I won't be able to invest in Canadians. We'll have less Canadian content. And I think that goes to the heart of creativity and innovation.
But ultimately, all of those revenue streams generate revenue both for the publisher or the record label on one hand and for the songwriter or the recording artist on the other. As Jennifer said, they really are partnerships. And so it's simply a mischaracterization of the issue for people like Brian and others to assume that all of the benefit of the term extension is going to companies and not to artists. It just isn't true, and it's a gross distortion of reality.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask you about the concept of registration requirement, because I know that was brought up, and a number of people in the field have felt that having the copyright extension where people could apply for the other 20 years rather than it being an automatic will allow for a lot more flexibility for how people maybe want to manage things. So I'm wondering if you can maybe just comment on the concept of registration requirement.
I'm glad you brought this up because it was in my speech and I just didn't get around to it. So I know that there was a lot of discussion about that, but I strongly disagree with mandatory registration regime. For one thing, our copyright registration regime was designed to deal with an existing system, which is voluntary registration. It's really not equipped to handle the administration of a mandatory registration regime. But putting that aside, registration just isn't necessary. Right now, publishers and songwriters register their songs with SOCAN and CMRA, which covers 99.9% of the market. And it works very, very well. Commercial users who license songs, they know how to find copyright owners within the existing system. So they properly clear the use of music. So to introduce a second registration system, which is operated by the government, is going to require a significant amount of time, resources, and money. And I'm
Ms.
not
Mitchell,
sure.
unfortunately,
Yes?
that's the time that we have for this round. I'm sorry. We'll now move to Mr. Esasi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know I only have 2 minutes left, so I'd like to go to Mr. Nante. You have spoken at length about how integrated the auto sector is. And as you know, one of the new features of this NAFTA is Chapter 26, which has to do with North American competitiveness. And it talks at length about regional economic growth. Is Chapter 26 something that would be of great utility to the auto sector, or would it have no application to the future prosperity of the sector?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it has no application, but the fact of the matter is we've been deeply integrated since the Auto Pact. And, it's almost, we can't go back and everything. So we're moving forward on that basis. And when you look at the multinationals that are at the table in North America, they also have plants around the world and so forth. But it's really important that we remain competitive here to support our supply base. So that's what's really important for the future, the certainty around that. As I said earlier, it may not offer guarantees for suppliers because if you were to lose an assembly plant, for instance, generally parts manufacturers gravitate to that assembly plant. If it's not here, then they'll go elsewhere.
Thank you very much.
That's all the time that we have for this panel. I want to thank the witnesses again for your testimony. Merci beaucoup pour votre présence ainsi que votre témoignage.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for being here today.
We can bring in the next round of witnesses. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And we will begin the third panel. Today we are hearing witnesses for the subject matter, study of clauses 22 to 38 and 108 to 122 of Bill C-4. Just to remind folks in the room that there is no photo taking or video conferencing allowed. And in addition, after the testimony, when you see the little yellow card, that means you have 30 seconds to wrap it up. So I'm going to try to give you the little waves to give you the heads up. Today we have various folks from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. We have Mr. Steve Verheul, our Chief Negotiator. Welcome. Robert Brookfield, Director General. Loris Mirella, Director Intellectual Property. Chandra Milia, Executive Director. Nicola Waterfield, Deputy Director. Welcome, everyone. We will have a 10-minute presentation from the panel, after which we will move into questions from the witnesses, from the committee members. So with that, I open the floor for your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee today. We look forward to answering questions regarding the outcome of the new NAFTA agreement following my opening remarks. The signature of the new NAFTA on November 30th, 2018 followed 13 months of intensive negotiations that brought together a broad range of officials and stakeholders with a strong partnership between federal and provincial officials. That agreement achieved several key outcomes that served to reinforce the integrity of the North American market, preserve Canada's market access into the U.S. and Mexico, and modernize the agreement's provisions to reflect our modern economy and the evolution of the North American partnership. On December 10th, 2019, following several months of intensive engagement with our U.S. and Mexican counterparts, the three countries signed a protocol of amendment to modify certain outcomes in the original agreement related to state-to-state dispute settlement, labor, environment, intellectual property, and automotive rules of origin. These modifications were largely the result of domestic discussions in the U.S. However, Canada was closely involved and engaged in substantive negotiations to ensure that any modifications aligned with Canadian interests. Throughout the negotiations, Canadian businesses, business associations, labor unions, civil society, and Indigenous groups were also closely engaged and contributed significantly to the final result. For the negotiations, we need to recall that the NAFTA discussions were unique. This was the first large-scale renegotiation of any of Canada's free trade agreements. And normally, free trade agreement partners are looking to liberalize trade. In this process, the U.S. goal from the start of the negotiations was to rebalance the agreement in their favor. The President had also repeatedly threatened to withdraw from NAFTA if a satisfactory outcome could not be reached. The opening U.S. negotiating positions were, to put it mildly, unconventional. These included a 50% U.S. domestic content requirement on autos, which would have decimated our auto sector. The complete dismantlement of Canada's supply management system, the elimination of the binational panel dispute settlement mechanism for anti-dumping and countervailing duties, which we've used extensively, particularly for products like softwood lumber, a state-to-state dispute settlement mechanism that would have rendered the agreement completely unenforceable, removal of the cultural exception, a government procurement chapter that would have taken away NAFTA market access, leaving Canada in a worse position than all of the other U.S. free trade agreement partners, and a 5-year automatic termination of the agreement known as the Sunset Clause. The U.S. administration also took the unprecedented step of imposing tariffs on imports of Canadian steel and aluminum on the basis of purported threats to national security, for which there was absolutely no evidence of any kind of justification. The U.S. administration had also launched an investigation that could lead to the same result for Canadian autos and auto parts. In the face of this situation, Canada undertook broad and extensive engagement with Canadians on objectives for the NAFTA modernization process. Based on the views we heard and our internal trade policy experience, Canada set out a number of key objectives, which can broadly be categorized into the following overarching areas. First of all, we wanted to preserve important NAFTA provisions and market access into the U.S. and Mexico, Secondly, we wanted to modernize and improve the agreement where possible. And thirdly, we wanted to reinforce the security and stability of market access into the U.S. and Mexico for Canadian businesses. With respect to preserving NAFTA, Canada maintained the NAFTA tariff outcomes, including duty-free treatment for energy products. We preserved the provisions on Chapter 19, which is the panel dispute settlement mechanism for anti-dumping countervailing duty matters. We preserved temporary entry for business persons. We preserved the cultural exception, and we preserved and actually improved the state-to-state dispute settlement mechanism. In the area of autos, changes were made to the rules of origin regime to encourage the use of more inputs from Canada, in particular by increasing the regional value content requirements for autos and auto parts, and removing incentives to produce in low-cost jurisdictions. Together with the quota exemption from potential U.S. Section 232 tariffs on autos and auto parts, secured as part of the final outcome, these new automotive rules of origin will incentivize production and sourcing in North America and represent important outcomes for both our steel and aluminum sectors. With respect to modernizing NAFTA, we modernized disciplines for trade in goods and agriculture, including with respect to customs administration and procedures, technical barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as a new chapter on good regulatory practices. That encourages cooperation and protects the government's right to regulate in the public interest, including for health and safety. Commitments on trade facilitation and customs procedures have been modernized for the 21st century to better facilitate cross-border trade, including through use of electronic processes, which will reduce red tape for exporters and save them money. New and modernized disciplines on technical barriers to trade in key sectors designed to minimize obstacles for Canadians doing business in the U.S. and Mexico while preserving Canadians' ability to regulate in the public interest. We also had modernized obligations for cross-border trade in services and investment, including financial services, telecommunications, and a new digital trade chapter. On labor and environment, we negotiated chapters that are fully incorporated into the agreement and subject to dispute settlement. These obligations will help ensure that parties maintain high standards for labor and the environment, and the domestic laws will not be deviated from as a means to gain an unfair trading advantage. The outcome also includes a special enforcement mechanism that will provide Canada with an enhanced process to ensure the effective implementation of labor reforms in Mexico, specifically related to freedom of association and collective bargaining. There were a number of other outcomes of note on supply management sectors. I think it's important to keep in mind that the U.S. did make an explicit and public demand for the complete dismantlement of Canada's supply management system. In the end, we preserved the three key pillars of supply management: production controls, import controls, and price controls, and granted only limited access to the U.S. On intellectual property, obligations cover a broad set of areas, including copyright and related rights, trademarks, geographical indications, industrial designs, patents, pharmaceutical intellectual property, data protection for chemical drugs and agricultural chemical products, border, civil, and criminal enforcement of IP rights, including civil and criminal IP rights enforcement in respect to trade secrets. Certain outcomes will require changes to Canada's current IP legal and policy framework in certain areas, such as copyright. And here we will increase copyright terms of protection, as well as provide criminal remedies in respect of rights management information. IP rights enforcement will also provide ex officio border authority for suspected counterfeit or pirated goods in transit, as well as criminal offenses for the unauthorized and willful misappropriation of trade secrets. In many of these areas, we negotiated transition periods to implement our commitments. And importantly, under the amending protocol, the parties agreed to remove the obligation to provide 10 years of data protection for biologic drugs, meaning that Canada does not need to change its existing regime in this area. The agreement also includes a new digital trade chapter that requires parties to have regulatory frameworks in place to address such things as privacy protections, fraudulent and deceptive practices, and will work together to mitigate threats to our cybersecurity. The agreement also includes commitments to address barriers to digital trade, such as provisions that ensure that companies and individuals can move information and data across borders in a reliable and secure manner while ensuring that legitimate privacy and security rights are protected. Other notable outcomes include that we will no longer have trilateral investor-state dispute settlement for Canada. We will not have investor-state dispute settlement applying between Canada and the U.S. There will be no government procurement chapter in NAFTA with respect to Canada. We will maintain our access to the U.S. under the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Government Procurement. So in closing, I would like to underline that our objectives for these negotiations were informed closely by Canadian priorities and interests, very close engagement with provinces and territories, as well as a wide range of stakeholders that we consulted on an ongoing basis. This concludes my opening remarks. Alongside my colleagues, we would be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will begin our first round of questionings at 6 minutes each question. I move to Madame Rempel-Garner to begin the questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start my questions as it pertains to Chapter 19. Reading Chapter 19, I noticed that it agrees to prohibitions against restrictions on the transfer of personal information and prohibitions requiring where computing facilities are located. And this has less policy flexibility on data localization under the CPTPP. So I'm wondering if you can table the analysis that shows that Chapter 19 of CUSMA will not prevent Canada from adopting laws that would create similar provisions, such as those contained in Article 20 of the GDPR, California's Consumer Privacy Act.
If I could, Madam Chair, I'd like to bring one of my experts to the table.
Madam Chair, can we stop the clock? I've lost about 20 seconds already.
If you could kindly introduce yourself and then respond to the question.
And actually, just to be clear, I'm just asking if the analysis on that particular provision could be tabled with committee.
Sorry, we don't have any specific analysis. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
So no analysis was completed on that?
No. So.
Thank you. That's good enough. Okay. So I'm wondering if Bill C4 will, if you can point me to anything in the bill that would preserve these the rights for Canada to proceed with similar types of legislation.
Well, the bill generally does not indicate where there is policy flexibility. It does the reverse. It'll indicate where there's policy limitations. So there's nothing in the bill that specifically says where the policy flexibility is in that area.
Can you table the analysis that shows that British Columbia's data localization laws would survive a challenge per the provisions in Chapter 19?
That analysis doesn't exist in the report form.
Okay, that's great. In the absence of a national data strategy, what guidelines was the government using on data privacy, data generation, and ownership in a 5G operating environment and Canada's place in the global data economy when taking a position on Chapter 19?
Again, the chapter provides certain policy limits and policy
Were
flexibility.
there specific guidelines on those points that were used by the negotiating team in putting together Chapter 19?
There were various considerations into putting together a negotiating position, but there's no documents related to that analysis.
There's no guidelines on Chapter 19. You know, at this point, I would point out that intangibles such as data, IP, are comprising a considerable more amount of major global economies. The government is spending billions of dollars on things like superclusters, yet you're telling me that there's been no analysis done on this particular issue when this is probably one of the biggest areas of economic growth. Can you table the analysis that was done with regard to the provisions in Chapter 19 around intellectual property, essentially entrenching an American status quo policy framework on IP, on the impact to things like the supercluster program and the ability for Canada, like our investment in those programs to generate and retain IP in Canada?
I think that there's a bit of a misunderstanding here. We don't complete formal pieces of analysis when we're preparing for negotiations. We rely on the expertise of the trade policy team, you see, part of which is here. We rely on consultations with stakeholders. We don't have the time to produce formal reports or analysis on all of those issues. But I can tell you this negotiating team is better informed on these issues than any other one in the world.
So, but you weren't able to tell me basic things like if these, like data localization is a fairly significant topic as it's going to pertain to new privacy frameworks, et cetera. The European Union has, in fact, as you're well aware, Mr. Buchel, they don't look at things that are in Chapter 19 because of the lack of regulatory framework or best practice on regulatory frameworks. Yet we've jumped right into this, and we've signed away a bunch of stuff under this provision. So if you're saying that your team had a lot of expertise and there was no analysis completed, that you didn't have time, why are we doing something that the EU has been loath to do?
I didn't say that we didn't have time. I said it's not something we routinely do. We rely on the expertise of the people that we have. We addressed many of those issues in the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, so there was already broad discussions of those issues that had taken place, and many of those issues had already been addressed in those forums.
Well, actually, on that note, I would note that specific to the addressing personal information protection requirements, where I think that there's some discrepancy between that and the TPP. Chapter 19, all it does is include a footnote that acknowledges that enforcing voluntary undertakings of enterprises related to privacy is sufficient to meet that particular obligation. It just seems to me like we have taken a position here that is far apart from where the European Union is. Do you think that that's going to create any problems, like the discrepancy between our agreement with the United States on data versus where the Europeans are at? Like, how would a company who's trying to operate in all of these environments proceed with Canada as a base if we're sort of, we've taken two very disparate approaches to this issue?
Well, you're quite right. The European Union takes a different approach on these issues than the U.S. does, certainly. And we do have agreements with the European Union, as you know, and with the U.S., and we're required to bridge the gaps if we're going to have the kinds of access we're going to have to both of those markets. So we will operate somewhat differently in both of those markets, but we know what the rules are.
How is that possible?
Well, it depends on the actual specific provisions. When it comes to some of the provisions with respect to data protection, then clearly we will have to offer that to other trading partners as well.
So we'd have to, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
The next round is for Mr. Johari.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to first of all welcome you to our committee, and thank you for the great work that you did over the challenging period that we are facing. We heard at the outset in the first hour of the testimony from an international trade lawyer, Mr. Herman, and I was left with a feeling that, well, this is in front of us, and we have to deal with this, and we have to approve it. And then subsequently, we heard from a lot of other organizations that they highlighted the benefit and how it's helped, how is it brought, how it's preserved, and how it's modernized. I also, in the briefing notes, I noticed that the negotiating team has proposed at least 3 different dispute mechanism, and those dispute mechanism is bringing different stakeholders and how dispute could be handled. Can you shed some light into these 3 different dispute mechanism, who the stakeholders are, and how this is actually preserving, and how is it modernizing the COSMA?
I think the whole area of dispute settlement is probably the area that we managed to achieve the most in the negotiations, because we came into this negotiation with the U.S. insisting on getting rid of the existing Chapter 19 under NAFTA entirely, which is the only reason we've been able to win a succession of cases on softwood lumber over the years to maintain some degree of access to that market, although it remains difficult. The only way we can challenge U.S. laws is through that Chapter 19 process, and that is unique in the world. So we managed to preserve that over adamant U.S. positions to get rid of it. When it comes to state-to-state dispute settlement, the U.S. also wanted to render that completely ineffective. So that they have a view that because of sovereignty considerations, they should not be able to be challenged if they break international obligations. And we managed to not only preserve state-to-state dispute settlement, but we actually improved it significantly so that we removed the problems that currently exist in the system, where the U.S. can and has blocked the formation of panels that we have requested to try to resolve disputes. So that has been much improved. We also have the new labor dispute settlement process, the rapid response mechanism with respect to labor practices in Mexico. That's also a new and innovative approach that doesn't exist in other agreements, but gives us the opportunity to pursue any kind of difficulties we might have with specific plants and operations in Mexico that are not respecting freedom of association for unions, collective bargaining, and other labor requirements. So from a dispute settlement perspective, I think we're on even much better ground than we were under the existing NAFTA.
Thank you. So on top of Chapter 19, actually Chapter 31, Chapter 10, and Chapter 14, were these new chapters that they were added or they were amended?
Well, the provisions on trade disputes on anti-dumping and countervailing duties, the trade remedy issues, that was left largely as it exists now. I believe that's Chapter 10 now. The dispute settlement between state to state was significantly modified, as I just pointed out. That's now Chapter 31. And the rapid response mechanism on the labor side is a brand new initiative that does not appear in NAFTA at all.
So how would Chapter 31 be able to help? If Chapter 31 can help us with some of this dispute we have over softwood lumber?
Well, softwood lumber, since that involves countervailing duties and anti-dumping duties, we would be more likely to use Chapter 10, the new Chapter 10, because under that we can actually challenge the U.S. application of its own laws. And we have won many times in the past and demonstrated that the U.S. did not properly apply their own laws when applying these duties and calculating these duties. That's something fundamental to a lot of the cases that we've had, not only on softwood lumber, on a variety of other products.
Thank you. I think I got 10 seconds, which I'm going to yield to the chair.
You actually have 1 minute.
I have 1 minute. Oh, great. Can you, you talked about the role of the transition period.
Yes.
And can you help us understand the period on that? I think it's 2 years. And how does it apply? And what are the benefits and what are the challenges with it?
Well, there are a number of transition periods in certain areas, primarily in intellectual property, although there's also some in agriculture and some other areas, where we wanted some additional time to allow us to have an adequate period of time to have adjustments in the sector or in the industry to allow them to accommodate the changes. We asked for those transition periods. We negotiated those, and that will allow us to have a much smoother process for changing from the existing rules to these new rules that are going to be in place.
Okay. So I would say, would you categorize as part of the modernization aspect of the?
Well, it's more a matter of easing the transition, because some of these rules will involve adjustments required by companies and exporters, and it's important that they have the time to be able to do what they need to do to adjust to these new rules.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. We'll now move to Monsieur Lemire.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Verheugen. I would just like to recognize the colossal effort that you and your team have made. Thank you. Now, of course, it is our job, sad to say, to highlight what perhaps you have had to sacrifice in your negotiations. Would you agree that the steel and aluminum industries may or may not have the same protections after the new agreement?
Well, I think you have to step back a bit, because you have to look at the existing NAFTA, where there is absolutely no protection on aluminum, no kind of provision on aluminum that requires a certain amount of aluminum to be used in the production of cars. Under the new rules, manufacturers will have to have at least 70% of their purchases of aluminum come from North American sources, which is largely Canada and more specifically largely Quebec. So that's a significant improvement. There is a difference between the steel and aluminum approaches, given that in this most recent amendment to the protocol that we negotiated and agreed to on December 10th, there will be a requirement for steel to be melted and poured in order to be qualifying as originating in those purchases by manufacturers. But we also have already established a process whereby we're monitoring imports of aluminum into the North American market. And if we start to see that there is a significant proportion of aluminum coming in from other countries, we will address that issue. We'll raise that issue with the U.S. and Mexico and make the argument that aluminum, because of that reason, should be treated the same way as steel with respect to that provision.
Ce qui est effectivement très intéressant.
What's very interesting and seems to be a new aspect in the negotiations, a mechanism that could allow us to adjust things before those 8 or 10 years that were discussed. I think that's an interesting avenue to explore. Are there other mechanisms that could be put forward to protect steel in particular?
Well, yes, no, I think we have two issues that we're dealing with on steel and aluminum. We have the provisions that are in the actual agreement, and we also have the national security 232 actions that the U.S. took against steel and aluminum. So we also successfully removed those, as you know. But now we do have a process of ongoing consultation with the U.S. about imports of steel and aluminum into North America, and trying to determine that there's no transshipment or there's no backdoor for other countries to have steel and aluminum come into North America. We want to protect our manufacturing sector, both in steel and in aluminum, and those provisions will also help us to do that.
Il y a néanmoins quand même dans ces protections.
In those protections, and perhaps I should have talked about this for the previous question, there's aluminum parts in cars and aluminum as such. But now moving on to the next topic, concessions have been made for ceilings for exports, especially in agriculture, for milk concentrates, skim milk concentrates, powdered skim milk. That approach for proteins, do you think that's a way for the United States to get around supply management and without abolishing it, to affect it negatively in a significant way?
I do have somebody from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada who is the chief negotiator for agriculture. I think he might be better suited to answer that question.
If you could kindly introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Aaron Fowler. I'm Canada's Chief Agriculture Negotiator from AAFC. Thank you for the question. The export monitoring provisions and export thresholds that are established for skim milk powder under this agreement are unusual. They're not akin to similar provisions that we have in other FTAs. They were included here because of specific concerns that the United States had with respect to aspects of the Canadian supply management system for dairy, and in particular, aspects of the National Dairy Ingredient Strategy, which was introduced in 2017 and was a new pricing approach for certain dairy products that was intended to encourage investment and innovation in the sector. The effect of those pricing changes on the United States had really two main areas of concern. One was they lost access to the Canadian dairy market for certain products where they had previously been quite competitive, and they saw themselves competing increasingly with Canadian exporters in certain specific types of dairy products where Canadian exports had not traditionally been so high. As an alternative to addressing their concerns as they wish to by dismantling the supply management system for dairy, we looked for ways to respond to those concerns that would be acceptable to both parties. And we explored many ways of doing that with respect to Canada's dairy exports to third countries. And ultimately, we settled on this as the least objectionable way forward. Thank you.
Merci. Dernière question.
Thank you. Last quick question. Do we believe that the free trade agreement has solutions for the softwood crisis that's been ongoing for at least 20 years?
Okay. Well, softwood lumber is obviously a part of the agreement. The U.S. has the right to impose, to initiate investigations and impose duties on what they consider to be anti-dumping and countervailing duties. And we have the right under the protection of the trade dispute settlement process under for anti-dumping and countervailing duties. So that's how that works. And any agreement on softwood lumber would be outside of the NAFTA agreement and provisions. Sure.
Our next speaker is Mr. Massé.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to you and your team for your hard work. I'm part of an interparliamentary association, the Canada-US, which involves Parliament here and also the Senate, and we go down to Washington twice a year and across the U.S., and we have co-meetings with Senate and Congress and so forth. We know that both capitals can be logic-free zones at times. And we saw some of the things that over the years emerge, and I just want to go to the point of the environment in labor. With our meetings with Congress and Senate over the years, and this includes Republicans and Democrats, I don't think I can remember, and this is a bipartisan group, and we go against Team Canada down there, where the labor environment wasn't raised by members of Congress and the Senate, even in particular to Mexico, against workers competing here in our country. So why wasn't that part of the original deal? Because that kind of really led to the exceptionally longer period of time because it had to go back to Congress. So maybe some comments about why we weren't pushing that from the beginning.
Well, I think there was an effort to try to improve the obligations on labor, and in the labor chapter itself, which for the first time under the new agreement is actually a part of the agreement and subject to dispute settlement, does include quite a significant number of improvements over the existing side agreement on labor, including protections against violence against workers. It includes enhanced disciplines and obligations with respect to labor.
But why wasn't that part of the original attempt? I mean, we left it for Congress and the Democrats to fix that component of it. Why wasn't that part of and it sat there in limbo for nearly a year because we didn't do that from the beginning?
Well, I think that the whole notion of a facility-specific rapid response mechanism was something that at that point in time simply hadn't been developed in that kind of detail. This is something that's never been done ever before, to have disciplines targeting specific facilities in another country. So that it did require a much longer negotiation with Mexico in particular, because they are the clear target of this. And working out all of those details was contentious and took a long time, and it simply wasn't something that was addressed in the first instance.
Okay. One of the things that's been left off, and maybe you can provide some guidance on where we go from here, is the TN visas. We still have, occupations now that go back and forth amongst the border that didn't even exist from the 25-year-old original deal. What do we do about that in clarity? Because where I represent in many border communities, it seems to be very discretionary about when certain occupations and jobs are allowed to go back and forth in regional as well. So what do we do about, I guess, that not making it to the surface of this negotiations?
Well, I think when it comes to those types of issues, when we started out, the U.S. position was to get rid of that whole chapter on temporary entry of business people. And our position was to try to enhance it and expand it. So we came from completely different places. We managed to preserve the chapter as it is, with the professions that are contained within that. And I think we do have opportunities as we move forward to try to further elaborate some of that and provide further specification. But I think the main challenge we had was to simply have a chapter addressing those issues at all, because the U.S. was adamantly against that.
Okay. And with regards to data and privacy, what assurances do Canadians have with regards to, we have a privacy commissioner, for example. They do not have that. What are there any vulnerabilities with regards to this deal, with regards to our independence of a privacy commissioner in crafting Canadian laws with changing technologies that allow that independence to be not only maintained, but I would hope in the future be also enhanced?
Well, we do have specific provisions related to protecting privacy, but perhaps I could ask Nolan to add a bit to that.
Sure. And just to introduce myself, I'm Nolan Weeb with Global Affairs Canada, Senior Trade Policy Officer there. As Steve mentioned, there are commitments in the context of the digital trade chapter, as well as in the exceptions chapter of Chapter 32 that relate to the protection of personal information. In the digital trade chapter, the context is specifically with online consumers. There's a broader context under Chapter 32 exceptions and general provisions where it applies to all aspects of the agreement. So that measure is intended to ensure that countries do have measures in place to protect personal information of businesses and consumers who engage in online trade.
So that will have no consequence on our privacy commissioner, though, or there's no?
Yeah, no. That provision will not have any implications for a privacy commissioner, nor would any other provisions in the context of this agreement in terms of their ability to enforce Canada's measures to protect Canadian personal information.
And lastly, Buy America still a problem? What's your recommendation? There's also Buy American, which also gets lost in that.
It does.
Is your time.
Thank you.
So the next round of questions will be 5 minutes each, and we begin with Mrs. Rempel-Garner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll pick up where I left off. Mr. Verhul, you said that we would have to offer. Your last comment before I got cut off was that we would have to offer provisions in Chapter 19 to other trading partners. Is this something that's being discussed with the European Union?
No, it's not at this point in time.
Thank you. So just building on where I was going last time, I know much of the testimony that we've had in front of this committee and others from organizations that represent the production of tangible goods this was sort of like a victory to survive for provisions regarding the export of tangible goods. I'm just wondering, given the significant concessions on data and IP in Chapter 19, and especially since, again, just to reemphasize, like the European Union has declined to entrench in their trade agreement similar provisions given the newness of the field, were these interests conceded in order to get clarity on issues that have more political tangibility, like export of manufactured goods?
No, we did not look at those kinds of trade-offs, and I would take exception to your characterization that those were necessarily concessions on our part when it comes to data. We do have a policy. This is not the first agreement that we've addressed those kinds of issues.
Okay, so you have a policy. So there was no, from the last panel, it said there was no analysis. And, I asked what sort of, in the absence of a national data strategy, what was guiding discussions? But you said you have a policy on this, right? So can you table that? Like, what I'm trying to get at is what strategy on the ownership of data, essentially the rights of data creators in Canada, especially on the impact of that on the Canadian economy over the last 10 years, did you use to guide your decisions?
Well, I think, again, that there's no country in the world that negotiates free trade agreements does detailed analysis that they release publicly on these kinds of things.
Okay, then let's talk about strategy and policy. So you just said you have a policy on this. So what strategy or policy, like what was this tying back to? The concessions that were made, or whatever, however you want to characterize Chapter 19, how was that tied to the long-term economic growth of the data economy in Canada over the next 10 years, given that it is significantly different than what the EU has taken, the position that they've taken on entrenching those provisions in their trade agreements?
The EU does take a different approach on this. There's no question about that. We have taken a different approach, both in this agreement and in, to some extent, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Why?
This came about largely as a result of consultations with industry, private sector,
Which industry
provinces
groups?
and territories. That's how we formulated our positions, along with our own analysis of how we should be conducting this.
Okay, so
we
you
have
said
a lot
there
of
was no
people
analysis done, and you
we
don't have
have-
time to analysis, but your own analysis was completed. I'm just a little confused on this.
Well, of course, perhaps there's two different senses of analysis. We are always doing analysis on every negotiating position we put forward, but it's
Okay,
not a
so
formal kind of analysis that we set out on paper and put in some kind of a public statement. This is based on the expertise that we have among our negotiators, and we establish it from that in conjunction with consultations with the private
I
sector.
guess just what I'm looking at, did you negotiate, like, sort of what sort of timeline horizon did you negotiate to in terms of economic analysis? Like, were you looking at current state or a 10-year period in terms of the impact of this agreement on GDP?
We always look at what the long-term implications of anything we negotiate are going to be. We don't look at the status quo of today.
Okay.
We look at what's likely to develop in the
So
future.
with regard to the impact that Chapter 19 would have on the data economy, the rights of data creators, the valuation of data as an intangible asset in Canada,
Mhm.
okay, what sort of analysis was done in terms of potential for economic growth under the provisions as negotiated in Chapter 19?
Well, obviously there are some different views in the private sector about these issues. We took a look at those, obviously. We relied, again, on the expertise that we have. And
Who argued in favor of those provisions in Chapter 19 from Canadian industry?
Well, we certainly had stakeholders. There are very
Would you be able to
diverse
table that with
views
us?
among stakeholders on those issues.
Who argued in favor of it?
Unfortunately, that is your time, Mrs. Rempel-Garner.
Thank you.
Our next round of questions go to Mr. Erskine Smith.
Thanks very much. We have Professor Geist in the next panel, and because much of the work that we're doing at this committee focuses on copyright extension, I wanted to quote Mr. Geist, who said, "The additional 20 years of protection beyond the international standard found in the Berne Convention will be costly for Canadians with little discernible benefit." And so I'm curious, why are we committed to extending the copyright term for 20 years? Is this something that we put on the table, or is this something that we accepted because the totality of the agreement?
For the question, good morning. That's the outcome of the negotiations, and it's part of the negotiations of the whole agreement.
Fair. So I take that to mean that that's not something we put on the table, but that's something we accepted because broadly, overall, the agreement's in our benefit, and while this provision may not well be, overall, it's still worth it. A very specific question, and it's just because a previous witness pointed this out, but in C4 to amend 6.2 of the Copyright Act, sub 2, there's a reference to 50 years, which is inconsistent with the other dates that I see throughout C4. I'm curious, is that reference to 50 years to be 70 years, or it's to be 50 years?
Sorry, could you repeat which clause here?
6.2 sub 2. Identity of author commonly known, and there's a reference to the remainder of the calendar year in which that author dies in a period of 50 years following the end of that calendar year. One of the witnesses suggested that should be 70 years. We're tasked with putting forward recommendations. I know pretty limited in what we can do, but that struck me as a little bit inconsistent with the rest of the document.
As far as I know, we're for, if that relates to anonymous and pseudonymous authors, we're trying to make it so it's 70 years.
Yeah, but in C4 we've got 50 years at 6.2 sub 2. 50 years. Anyway, perhaps you don't need to answer now. I mean, some clarity on that would be useful. With respect to the criminal code provision, I'm just curious why this provision in the criminal code is necessary, and what does it cover that wasn't there previously?
Presently, the Canadian law does not criminalize theft of trade secrets. It's done by common law or by provinces.
I wasn't meaning the theft of trade secrets. The new provision is in relation to removes or alters any rights management information. I'm just curious why that is necessary in the criminal code versus where we see it elsewhere in the law already.
The treaty requires that we have criminal provisions for rights management information, and then it's up to the government to decide where best to situate how to meet that obligation.
Understood. So turning to Chapter 19, Ms. Rempel-Garner's canvass data localization concerns, although I note that we can restrict cross-border data flows if it's in the public interest to do so. So we may not have data localization rules per se, but we can have some sort of adequacy standard in the same way that the EU does. I want to turn to Safe Harbor, though. The work that I had done, a little bit of the work I'd done in the last Parliament, noted when we look at the liability potentially attaching to Facebook and Google's of the world going forward, we looked at not only them as creators and, what does it say, in part, so except to the extent the supplier or user has in whole or in part created or developed the information. So we know Facebook and Google don't create or develop this information, they are hosts, but they do use their algorithm to encourage the dissemination of that content. And I'm curious to what extent the safe harbor rules at 19.17 would restrict our ability to make these companies liable for increasing the visibility and views of content through their algorithms.
Sorry, this particular article would not affect the ability for Canada to address those types of situations where, as you mentioned, through their use of algorithms, they may in fact have a process in creating the content.
Not creating the content, though, promoting the content.
Promoting.
Two very different things.
Erskine-Smith, that's your time. And our next round of questions goes to Mrs. Jacek.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the team, and I would even say congratulations. Prior to my election, I was watching and observing, and I'm really pleased that we're at this place now, that we're looking at C4. One of the areas, I've been listening intently, obviously, this morning and even during question period. One of the areas, I guess, of concern, and Monsieur Lemire has been probing extensively, is the whole area of the aluminum industry in Quebec. And we heard this morning that there is really severe concern in terms of competitiveness of that industry going forward. SMEs are concerned. So I would just like to hear a little bit more about the engagement that occurred with the players, the stakeholders in the industry. And though I know you were able to achieve perhaps more than was there before, could you perhaps reassure us a little bit more as to how you see this going forward?
Certainly, and I think the aluminum issue is one that I think has become a bit distorted in some of the discussion. As I mentioned before, we did achieve a new requirement that doesn't exist now, that 70% of purchases by manufacturers of aluminum have to be of North American origin. On top of that, we have much more North American content that's required in the rules of origin for autos. So that there's much less room to use foreign inputs than there has been in the past, which is also going to put significantly more of an incentive on purchasing aluminum from North American sources. But with respect to the difference between steel and aluminum, after 7 years, steel will be treated somewhat differently because of this melted and poured requirement. That requirement will not apply to aluminum. And there's a 10-year review of aluminum to see whether it requires a similar type of process. But we have already had discussions with the U.S. and with Mexico to talk about if there is a pattern of aluminum imports into North America from China, from other countries that are undercutting the North American market, then we will have the opportunity to revisit that issue and see whether aluminum does require the same treatment as steel. There's no requirement for us to wait those 10 years to address that issue. We can address it as soon as we start to see a problem.
And this morning there was some question around RVC, regional value content. Could you just again explain a little bit more how that is measured and how we ensure the accuracy of that type of measurement?
Yes, regional value content is the percentage of North American sourced materials that have to go into a particular auto that's being manufactured. And that applies to every part that's coming up and composes part of the auto. And currently, you have to meet a regional value content of 62.5%. That rises to 75% under the new agreement. The new agreement also introduces a new element for core parts, engines, transmissions, axles, those kinds of things, that also require 75%. That doesn't exist now. And there's, of course, the steel and aluminum requirement that we've discussed, and there's the labor value content that we also discussed. So all of that feeds into the kind of content requirements that will be required for the manufacture of autos, which includes an overall emphasis on greater North American content.
So overall improvement. If I have some time left, just one thing. As a physician, I'm always interested in the price of drugs for Canadians. Could you just explain a little bit more as to what occurred in the agreement related to drug prices, patent protection, and so on?
Thank you. So, as you know, there was a negotiated outcome, and then there was a change in some of those elements, including those related to biologic drugs. So that obligation was removed from the agreement, so Canada can continue to carry out its policy in that area. There's nothing specifically related to cost as such, but of course, if there's any provision that prevents the entry of generic versions of drugs, that would have an impact on potential impact on drug costs in the future. So with the removal of that provision, the only other change that was made to that needs to be made to Canada's regime is in respect of the patent term adjustment for delays in the processing of a patent application by a patent office or the patent office.
And unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. I would like to thank everyone for coming. Thank you very much for your excellent testimony. We will suspend so that we can prepare for the next panel. Thank you. To order. Donc, bienvenue au comité permanent.
Welcome to the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today, we will be studying clauses 22 to 38 and 108 to 122 of Bill C-4.
Professor Michael Geist, from Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce, e-commerce law, Faculty of Law here at the University of Ottawa. Nous avons Bruno Letendre.
We also have Bruno Letendre from the Producteurs de lait du Québec. Welcome. François Dumontier, Director Communications, Public Affairs and Trade Union Life at Les Producteurs de lait du Québec. And Luc Boivin from Fromagerie Boivin. Welcome. We will start with 10-minute statements per group and then questions.
Of 10 minutes by each group, followed by questions for each. We have 3 groups today instead of 4 at this panel, so we have a little more time for the witnesses. Si vous voyez le carton jaune, ça veut dire que vous avez 30.
If you see the yellow card, that means 30 seconds are left.
Yellow carton, that means you have 30 seconds remaining. With that, we will start with Monsieur Luc Boivin, qui est le propriétaire de Fromagerie.
We will start with Luc Boivin, owner of Fromagerie Boivin. My name is Luc Boivin. I am the director of the Boivin cheese makers. I'm here to discuss the bill to implement the Canada-US-Mexico agreement and the effect that this will have on my company, as well as the dairy industry. I would like to draw your attention to the harms that will be caused by this agreement to my business and others in the region, and then I will propose possible measures that could be taken to help the industry by the government. With the situation that our industry is currently facing with CUSMA and other similar agreements, we are a 4th-generation company that was founded by my great-grandmother in 1939. At that time, we processed milk from the family farm and created cheeses for export. We acquired the Le Maire cheesemakers and now use 40 million liters of milk, and we employ 340 employees. And under the Boivin Le Maire brand, we sell our products throughout Canada, thanks to a contract with a large Canadian company. We also operate facilities in the east of Quebec in the Charlevoix region. And this business creates Canadian Swiss cheese and employs 45 people in the Charlevoix region. We plan to continue investing and exploring new markets. Unfortunately, the uncertainty created by government decisions make it more difficult. The current stagnation in the dairy industry in Canada is having a disproportionate impact in isolated regions, for example, mine. It is difficult to continue processing milk in such areas. The impact of commercial trade agreements, once this agreement is implemented, it will add to various concessions made in other FTAs. It could represent up to 18% of the Canadian market. And that doesn't just mean, that means that there will definitely be a drop in volume for Canadian processors. Given that there won't be access to a regulated price outside of Canada, and then there will be high levels of competition, not only between processors in the dairy industry, but in general in the food industry. So the 18% access that was granted through the implementation of various FTAs by the Canadian government has led to a contraction in profit margins and has affected dairy processors. It is government decisions that have created the current situation, which has led to a decrease in investment, consolidation, and other negative effects. We must call a spade a spade. ultimately, despite voiced support for the supply management system, the dairy industry is being harmed. In fact, it is impossible to lead to a healthy processing industry without healthy agricultural production. And that can't be done, and that also requires a healthy processing industry. It's a win-win. Now, we heard, for example, the $1.6 billion announcement to support dairy producers. I was very happy to hear that. That will help my suppliers, my friends with whom I play hockey, in fact. But 6 months after the announcement, there is still no help for the dairy processing industry, which I find very shocking. The negative impacts of FTAs. Well, it is absolutely necessary to put into place a compensation system. We need the help of the federal government. It's time to end these empty promises. We need action. We need to help Canadian dairy processing SMEs. We need measures that will help us when it comes to our specific needs. We need technical assistance and help when it comes to the consolidation of the dairy industry, because the dairy industry has been thrown to the bus 3 times when in pursuit of international trade. Many businesses have closed. Well, we have to at least help it go in dignity, and that is what the government has committed to. And it's more than just financial help. We need to consider exports. Exports of cheese, poutine, which is a Quebec flagship product. It's a Quebec invention and could potentially be exported, but these are markets that are hard to reach. There are other possible mitigation measures. For example, when it comes to quotas for dairy processors, currently permits are not always being granted to some distributors. Is the government aware of the impact of this on our markets? These permits are required to transfer the volumes that are necessary. It doesn't make any business sense, and it is destroying our markets and margins and creates an environment that is bad for investment. When the government is granting permits, we ask the government to take into consideration the needs of our market. In conclusion, I would like to say that the supply management system will not be healthy unless the processing sector is also healthy. We are creating value-added products like cheese and yogurt. They ultimately create the best bottom lines in the entire supply management system. If this continues, we will be simply throwing away great quantities of skimmed milk. The government claims that it's going to help the supply management system, but it's time to take action. It's time to walk the talk. We need a program to support the dairy processing sector. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Boivin.
Thank you, Mr. Boivin. And now, let's move on to Mr. Letendre and Dumontier. I don't know who's going to make the presentation, but you have 10 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you. I'm Bruno Letendre. I'm the chair and a member of the board of the Producteurs de lait du Québec, or rather a member of the board of the Canadian milk producers. So thank you for the time to make the presentation. The milk sector creates a steady supply of milk for the Canadian market. And in fact, it's one of the 2 biggest sectors in 7 out of 10 provinces, and it is a driver of sustainability and innovation. There are 10,000 farms and 500 producers, and is a cornerstone of the rural sector in Canada. The GDP of the sector was more than $20 billion, with revenues of $3.8 billion. Throughout the country, we're talking the equivalent of 221,000 FTEs. And throughout Quebec, the farms lead to 3.37 billion liters of milk, which is the equivalent of $2.6 billion, leading to 83,000 direct and indirect jobs and $6.2 billion contribution to GDP. with financial benefits of $1.3 billion. Now, these recent changes are creating a detriment for our producers. The results of the CUSMA negotiations have caused concessions in the dairy sector, which represents 3.9% of the total Canadian production in 2017. With the various concessions made, first in CETA and then in the TPP-CP, we will be talking 18% of total dairy production. After the negotiations with the US about changes to possible dairy supply management production, in this FTA, the Canadian sector has been forced to consult its direct competitor in another country. This is a dangerous precedent to set. And this is leading to a loss of Canadian sovereignty. These recent FTAs are creating uncertainty, especially when it comes to young producers, and could have a considerable impact on producers and processors and lead to job losses in communities throughout the country. There's more than just economic considerations. This creates additional uncertainty at a time when we are already concerned about the mental health of farmers and people living in rural areas. On various occasions, the PM has promised to fully and fairly compensate the sector after the CPTPP, CUSMA, and CETA. And this was repeated in the motion that was unanimously adopted in the House of Commons in October 2018. The motion states that the House is requesting that the government create a program to financially compensate producers of poultry, eggs, and dairy because of the loss caused by changes in the supply management system, as we've seen in the CPTPP, CETA, and CUSMA. On the 16th of August 2019, the government said that it would compensate producers in the order of $2 billion. But this amount does not cover CUSMA. $250 million had already been provided in the context of a different program, and the remaining money is supposed to be provided later on during a program that was started in fall 2019. And it is supposed to grant $345 million to producers by the end of March. This direct assistance is supposed to be provided over 7 further years. All Canadians are affected by these recent FTAs, and producers are in the best position to know their own needs. They have stated that direct transfers would be the best way to support them. This meets the recommendations of the Working Group on Mitigation Measures that was created by the federal government after the signature of CUSMA. And it is also necessary to determine the exact modalities for the transfers. Now, during the CPTPP and CETA, efforts were made in order to determine these measures. This is a good thing, but in order to fully meet its commitments, the government should properly compensate producers in the context of CUSMA. This is necessary in order to create a thriving dairy industry that will create jobs and favor investment. Compensating the sector is important in order to reestablish trust. It will give the sector the necessary confidence to move forward so that it doesn't disappear. This help from the government will be used to reinvest in the Canadian economy. It will also enable producers to continue investing as they are now at the same levels as they are now in R&D and innovation, as well as sustainable technology. A viable and sustainable dairy industry is important in producing healthy and affordable dairy products for Canadians. Canadian dairy producers would have preferred, instead of this compensation, to simply not have made concessions in the FTAs initially. And that is why we recommend that the Canadian government continue to make direct payments over the 7 remaining years in order to reduce the effects caused by the CPTPP and CETA. that the Canadian government respect its commitment to fully and fairly compensate dairy producers in order to mitigate the effects of the FTA, according to the recommendations of the Working Group on Mitigation Measures created by the government. And now, let's discuss the exports tax. The agreement also includes clauses regarding the export taxes on some dairy products over a certain level, and this creates a dangerous precedent which could affect other sectors in future agreements. The agreement states that in the case of certain products, such as skim milk, beyond a certain quality, that a exports tax will be levied. That will ultimately lead to a threshold over which these products cannot be exported, which will make the products uncompetitive. We must find a way to reduce the impact of this tax on exports, perhaps through an administrative agreement with the US, even after the ratification of the agreement. This would create a precedent on any Canadian goods that might be exported, and this will reduce Canada's competitiveness on the world markets. Moreover, the impact of recent free trade agreements has not been limited only to dairy producers. It also affects dairy processors, who are a big part of the long-term sustainability of the sector, as well as other supply-managed sectors. Thus, our organization recommends that the Canadian government negotiate an administrative agreement with the American government in order to reduce the impacts of the export taxes in the agreement, which will be triggered over a certain level of dairy exports. For example, skim milk, powdered milk, and other products. It is important to recall that these thresholds for these various products will lead to a spectacular decrease in export volumes. We're talking 35% over a mere question of months. This will be a blow for the sector, which will not have a transition period in order to adjust to this. Moreover, the impact of these agreements is not limited to dairy producers. Thus, we would ask the government to create an appropriate transition period by ensuring that the agreement only enters into force after August 1st, 2020. Unfortunately, Canada's border agencies don't have the training and tools necessary to properly monitor what is entering Canada because our borders are porous. That will become even more of a problem as imports increase. We recommend that appropriate resources and training be offered to CBSA agents in order to increase their ability to handle border issues as the issue arises and transparently, especially given the provisions of this agreement. In conclusion, Madam Chair, our position is that no future FTA should make concessions in terms of market access to the dairy sector. We understand the importance of international trade for the Canadian economy, and we are not opposed to Canada's signing or negotiating new agreements, but we don't want these agreements to further harm the dairy sector. With the support of the federal government, our producers will continue to be able to succeed and contribute to Canadians' health and well-being. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. I now invite Professor Geist to present his testimony. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning. As you heard, my name is Michael Geist. I'm a law professor at the University of Ottawa, where I hold the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law, and I'm a member of the Centre for Law, Technology and Society. My areas of specialty include digital policy, intellectual property, privacy, and the Internet. I appear today in a personal capacity representing only my own views. Now, as you know, the typical approach before a committee on bill study is to examine the bill, identify provisions to support, and areas for amendment. In this case, at least for my areas, what really matters is not what is in the bill, but what's not. The most notable issues from a digital policy perspective, which obviously have significant implications for issues addressed by this committee, won't be found by and large in Bill C4. Rather, they're found in CUSMA itself, and they typically limit Canada's policy options for future policy reforms rather than require immediate legislative action. This raises a significant challenge since the flawed aspects of the deal can't be fixed in C4. Rather, they require a change in a trade agreement that is largely presented as a take-it-or-leave-it deal. I'd like to briefly discuss 4 issues along these lines, some of which could create costs that run into the hundreds of millions of dollars for Canada. Copyright term extension, the cultural exemption, privacy and data protection, and internet platform liability. I'll start with copyright term extension, and I know you heard about that earlier today. The IP provisions in the agreement raise some significant concerns, but none more so than the requirement to extend the term of copyright from the international standard of life of the author plus 50 years to life plus 70. The additional 20 years is a reform that Canada rightly resisted for decades by both Liberal and Conservative governments. By caving on the issue, the agreement represents a major windfall that could run into the hundreds of millions of dollars for rights holders and creates the need to recalibrate Canadian copyright law to restore the balance, for example, perhaps addressing some of the issues you heard earlier on digital locks. The independent data on copyright term extension is unequivocal. It creates less access to works, higher costs for consumers, and no incentive for new creativity. In the words of Professor Paul Held, one of the leading researchers on the effects of term extension, it represents a tax on consumers to the benefit of publishers with no obligations to benefit the public. Now, this committee's copyright review conducted an extensive review into the issue and recommended establishing a registration requirement to obtain the additional 20 years of protection to mitigate against the disadvantages of term extension and increase overall transparency of the copyright system. Term extension doesn't appear in C4 because the government negotiated a 30-month transition period to address the issue. I think the government has rightly not rushed into term extension, and we should be taking full advantage of the transition period to follow this committee's recommendation to establish a registration requirement for the additional 20 years. That would allow rights holders to get the additional who wanted to get the additional protection they're looking for, while also ensuring that many other works enter into the public domain after their term of protection expires after life plus 50 years. Secondly, the cultural exemption. Much like copyright term extension, there is no reference to the cultural exemption in Bill C4. That's because the exemption doesn't require legislative reform. However, I'd argue that the exemption is one of the most poorly understood aspects of this agreement, at least in the areas I focus on. Consistent with government claims, the cultural exemption covers a broad range of sectors with a near-complete exemption for Canada. While the government has emphasized its broad scope, it rarely speaks of what the U.S. demanded in return, namely the right to levy retaliatory measures of equivalent commercial effect where Canada relies on the exemption. The retaliatory measures provision means the U.S. is entitled to levy tariffs or other measures that have an equivalent commercial effect in response to Canadian policies that would otherwise violate CUSMA if not for the cultural exemption. Since the provision does not limit the response to the cultural sector, the U.S. can be expected to target sensitive areas of the Canadian economy, such as the dairy sector, in order to discourage its use. That was the U.S. strategy recently when responding to a French plan to levy a new digital tax, which led to plans or threats to levy U.S. $2.4 billion in tariffs against French goods such as wine, cheese, and handbags. Now, how could this play out in a Canadian context? The recent Broadcast and Telecommunications Legislative Review Panel report, the so-called Yale report, contains what I would view as many ill-advised recommendations on regulating the internet and online news services, such as news aggregators. Should the government adopt the Broadcast panel recommendations on content, the U.S. would have a strong case permitting retaliation with measures of equivalent commercial effect. Panel proposals that may violate the new trade agreement include requirements to pay levies to fund Canadian content without full access to the same funding mechanisms enjoyed by Canadian firms, licensing requirements for internet services that may violate NAFTA standards, and discoverability requirements that limit the manner in which information is conveyed on websites and services. Now, I emphasize that I think this is bad policy that should be rejected. However, for the purposes of this review, note that the policy flexibility to enact reforms in this area is severely limited by the agreement, which establishes the possibility of retaliatory tariffs in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Third, the digital charter and privacy. Limitations on Canadian policy also arises in the context of privacy and data protection. Unlike the cultural exemption, which permits violations of the treaty subject to those retaliatory tariffs, on the issue of privacy, Canada would run the risk of simply being offside its commitment under CUSMA. And once again, there is no provision on point in C4. There's no need for one because CUSMA prohibits certain privacy-related provisions rather than requiring them. For example, and this I know came up in the previous panel, CUSMA includes a provision restricting data localization, which refers to measures requiring data be stored within Canada. It features a more restrictive provision than that found in the CPTPP. There are some general exceptions, but the Canadian government will be restricted in its ability to establish localization requirements under the agreement. Those implications, I think, are far-reaching. Consider the wide range of policy issues with data right now. Canada's digital charter and its proposed privacy and data reforms, concerns about data sovereignty, AI-related issues, and fears about the competitiveness of Canadian businesses in relation to Canadian data. Now, the Canadian government itself has established localization requirements as part of its cloud computing policy. Indeed, there is a recognition that data localization may be needed in some circumstances. Yet, under this agreement, Canada has limited its ability to regulate. So, too, for the issue of data transfers, as CUSMA also limits the ability to restrict them. As we enter into a discussion with the European Union about the adequacy of Canadian privacy laws, there are concerns that a data transfer provision could leave Canada between a proverbial privacy rock and a hard place, with the EU demanding certain restrictions and CUSMA prohibiting them. Now, finally, Internet platform liability. A similar dynamic arises in the context of Internet platform liability, which raises the question of what responsibility lies with Internet companies for third-party content on their sites. The issue captures large players such as Google and Facebook, but frankly almost anyone that offers user comments or content. There's no provision in C4 on this either. Once again, the reason is that CUSMA restricts policy in the area rather than requiring a new provision. Now, CUSMA includes a legal safe harbor for Internet intermediaries and platforms for content posted by their users. The rule is designed to provide Internet platforms with immunity from liability, both for the removal of content as well as for the failure to remove content. Now, contrary to some claims, that does not mean that everything goes. Sites and services are still subject to court orders and the enforcement of criminal law. Further, intellectual property rights enforcement is also exempted. However, some have now argued that the responsibility of Internet intermediaries should go further, with potential liability for failure to act even in cases of harmful, albeit legal, content. Now, I think that issue raises important freedom of expression concerns and questions about how we balance freedom of expression and speech with protection from harm. The issue with C4 and CUSMA is not to debate where Canada should land. The broadcast panel recommended liability for online harms, even if the content is legal. Others, myself included, would argue that liability should rest with illegal content, but to create liability for legal content is to render Internet companies judge and jury over what remains online, thereby further empowering the large Internet companies, as well as limiting competition and freedom of speech. Yet the key point here is that there is a policy debate to be had. And under CUSMA, Canada has already committed to a position, one that restricts our ability to establish liability for third-party content. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor. We'll now begin with our 6-minute round questions. Our first speaker is Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Mr. Geist. I have followed some of your podcasts, so do find them interesting. Couple of quick questions. I wanted to start off, you actually had started off talking about the innovation and competitiveness and with this extension and how that could potentially restrict that. And I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about that, how that impacts the industry, but also how this impacts public organizations such as libraries and educational institutions with accessing information going into the future.
Sure, thanks for that question, and thanks for the podcast plug as well. In fact, I would note that this week's podcast, which dropped just a couple of hours ago, features an interview with Paul Held, the expert on copyright term extension. And we specifically talked about his research into the area and the costs and consequences of term extension. He's done some really interesting work that looked at things like Amazon data to try to identify what is the impact of access to works when they're in copyright and once they fall into the public domain. And what he found was that, in fact, works that are out of print but still in copyright become much tougher to actually access. It hurts both authors and the public. Whereas once works fall into the public domain, they become more widely accessible. He looked at Wikipedia data to try to put a value on the value of the public domain by noting the use of pictures that are in the public domain and what that value would be. And he noted that it runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so in direct answer to your question, we have now multiple studies that point to the enormous cost that comes from term extension. What that would do in this case is literally stop our public domain from expanding for 2 decades, for really an entire generation. What that means from an education perspective, at a time when if you go into our schools, especially at elementary and high school levels, you find that public domain works still play a critically important role. In fact, the Ontario Book Publishers Organization conducted a study on the role of Canadian works in our schools, and what they found was that the public domain still constitutes an important part of what we are accessing and using in our classrooms. If we extend the term of copyright, we increase costs, we make those works ultimately less accessible and more costly for education.
Great, thank you for that. I wanted to touch base as well on registration requirement, and you did mention it just really briefly. There seems to be a number of different beliefs around this, whether it's good or not, and I'm wondering if you can maybe explain the analysis as to why that would be something that would be appropriate for the industry to move forward with.
Sure. So it is, as I mentioned, it is something that was recommended by this committee as part of the copyright review. And I think what it seeks to do is strike a balance between what we now face as a obligation under the treaty. The committee also noted that it would not extend the term of copyright, but for an obligation under one of these treaties. And now we face that. And what registration would do is essentially say, we will meet the international standard of the Berne Convention of Life Plus 50, and that Berne Convention does not allow you to put forward registration requirements. But that's for the standard of the Life Plus 50. For that additional 20 years, that effectively can fall outside that registration requirement found in the Berne Convention. And so what we can do is say, we are at Life Plus 50 plus 20. We will give the option to extend the term of copyright. So if you have witnesses and others that say, we think we would benefit from term extension, from that extra 20 years, they can get it. But for the overwhelming majority of works, for which people don't have those same kinds of concerns, who are oftentimes happy for it to enter into the public domain, bear in mind, we're talking about life of the author and now 50 years after they've passed away, those would fall into the public domain without that extension. And so I think it would put Canada in the position to really be a model for how to more effectively deal with term extension and do a better job of striking the balance between, on the one hand, providing protection for those that want it, while on the other hand, doing what we can to preserve the harm that comes from term extension.
Thank you. And I'm going to split my time since we only have one round of questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions for the dairy farmers and producers. Quick comment on the precedent regarding sovereignty we've given up with regards to milk powder, protein powder, and infant formula, and also, taking a look at the export threshold. So I wonder if we could have a quick comment on how you feel. Was there any discussion that had taken place there? Does it follow any of the international trade rules that you've seen? And was there any consultation with you? And first of all, perhaps maybe I could ask Mr. Letendre if you would speak to that, and only have about a minute left for both of you.
Thank you for the question. No, we weren't consulted on those articles. For an example, the cow gives a product that the consumer doesn't need, so we always have surplus. And the government has agreed to limit it, and the country's sovereignty is being attacked. Processors could complete that because they have to process those products, but they can't sell them off. We weren't consulted, and that affects our sovereignty and the development of the dairy industry.
Ms. Boivin?
Oui, ben écoutez, ça abonde dans le même sens.
Yes, in the same vein, table milk is down 1.8%. In Canada, yogurt is down 3%. Cheese is a 1.5% increase, but that includes quota tariffs. So what's imported, Canadian cheese is going down. What's creating need is demand for butter and cream. Non-fat solids, there's no outlet for that, and that's decreasing the price at the farm gate. And so there's an increase in classes 1, 2, and 3. I'm sorry, Mr. Boivin, we're over time. But the next group of questions is from Mr. Lemierre. I'll give you the floor. To complement that, Mr. Boivin, I think we can see that this new free trade agreement is a step backwards for you compared to the former NAFTA. It affects our profitability. What do you think can be done to manage surpluses with proteins and powdered milk? Is this a step towards the end of supply management? Listen, that's what's being said. Supply management has been undermined and the model is crumbling. We can't ask cheesemakers, yogurt producers, and others to continue to pay more for milk. The government, in recent agreements, has really looked for lucrative agreements for Canada on cheese. We're seeing high prices. Swiss cheese is coming in from Europe for $7.50 a kilo in Montreal, but the price of milk currently at the plant is $9 a kilo. How can we be competitive in that market? A market that's not growing, it's stagnant, or there are a few small increases in butter and cream, but overall, we're facing unfair competition, and that affects our profits, not only for market loss, but for our whole overall number. We're becoming less competitive, and it's making us less sustainable as a company. The dairy industry has been sacrificed, and Quebec MPs need to listen to us. Quebec will be the most impacted. We process 80% of yogurt, 60% of fine cheeses in Quebec. That will have impacts in Quebec all over, and this will affect dairy basins where there are few consumers, and it will consolidate the industry in areas like Toronto and Montreal. So overall, it won't be good. And I saw companies close at the beginning of the 2000s in my area. There were major job losses in the regions of Quebec, and I'm seeing that coming. And the government isn't taking action. We've put solutions on the table, but nothing's being done. Thank you. My question now is for Mr. Dumontse and Mr. Letendre. May 1st is an important date for you. You mentioned it because there's a 3-month delay before the implementation of the agreement, August 1st. We've talked a lot about surplus protein that could be exported. Concretely, could you give us the numbers that will have as an impact? How many tons are you currently exporting? Today, it's about 80,000 tons. It could go up to 100,000 tons. We've done some models over a number of years, and we submitted that to the government. And it'll continue for the reasons Mr. Boivin mentioned. There's an increase in fat processing. And so there's a surplus for non-fat solids. And in parallel, you mentioned the ratification date that will have an impact because the threshold is in 2 phases. There's 55,000 tons and then 35,000 tons. And the agreement sets out those thresholds calculated in dairy years, and that begins in August. So if it's ratified before then, the agreement, then starting in August, there'd be the first threshold, and it would go to the second threshold, 35,000 tons. That would accelerate the impact for us of that threshold. For the benefit of my colleagues, my understanding is that if we sign before May 1st, then it's a race against time for you, because you need to sell up to 55,000 tons of product in a very short amount of time, in 2 or 3 months. If we were to sign today, but if we sign after May 1st, then you would at least have 1 dairy year to sell 55,000 tons before you're impacted at 35,000. And it's going from 80,000 to 35,000 tons. The agreement had a transition phase. The first year, the threshold was higher, and then the second year and afterwards, the threshold is lower. So if the agreement is ratified and comes into force before the second dairy year, before August 1st, well, the transition period would be less than a month, and we'd move right into the second threshold. Finally, regarding the compensation program, my question could be to both groups. We're talking about compensation, that it's fair and full. Would you have preferred mechanisms with money or protection against competition, or both? Mr. Boivin. Presentations on measures have been done, and we've advocated for retailers to have a framework for practices to ensure that supply management is controlled over the whole chain, because our prices are affected with the raw materials, but when we sell our product, there's a highly consolidated market for retailers, and there's no framework for that. Similar measures have been put in place in England and elsewhere, and they've been good in that area. We've been sacrificed on the altar of international trade and the government. I'm sorry, Mr. Boivin. But the time is up.
For my apologies, Mr. Erskine Smith, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. Professor Geist, thanks for joining us. We had testimony earlier that indicated that maybe it wasn't our idea to extend copyright. We didn't want it, but we accepted it in consideration of the totality of the agreement and the benefit overall. I take it you would have this committee recommend a recommendation that this committee has previously made, which is that we should encourage the government to take the 30-month period to create a registration framework for the extension of 20 years. Is that right? Now, I'm less familiar with the cultural exemption concerns that you raise. Are there any particular recommendations that you think ought to be made by this committee?
Well, listen, I mean, I think it's quite clear that there is a desire to have the cultural exemption in place, and I understand why. But I raise it to to ensure that I think members of Parliament better recognize the costs associated with the cultural exemption, particularly in the current environment that we're facing, because there are, within, let's say, the digital chapter, there are provisions in there that could be triggered. There are clearly proposals, as I mentioned, the Yale report that could be triggered. And so we need to recognize, and I've seen some that I think mistakenly think that this is almost like a get out of jail free card, that you can do whatever you like from the perspective of
so
Canadian
it was preserved, but at some
sector.
cost.
What's that?
It was preserved, but at some cost.
At a significant cost, yes.
And when we talk about the digital chapter, you had highlighted, I think, something that Ms. Rempel Garner had highlighted as well, which is concerns about data localization rules. Now, it would have been preferable, I think, when I read 1912, that it would have mirrored 1911, which at least allows us to limit cross-border data flows where it's in the public interest to do so. We don't see any exception or limitation to the restrictions on data localization. When we look at the cross-border transfer of information by electronic means, is it any comfort at all that there is we can restrict cross-border data flows in the public interest, especially in reference to 19.8, which is privacy protections?
Yeah, I think it's of limited comfort. When this kind of provision was being negotiated as part of the TPP, and so there's similar provisions, although, as I mentioned, this one's even more limited. A U.S. group, Public Citizen, did a study on references on the kind of comfort that the public interest exception provides, and they took a look specifically at WTO cases where that language was used. They found, I believe the number was 43 out of 44 cases, attempts to use public interest as the exception was defeated.
Interesting.
And so the practical effect, at least under WTO jurisprudence, has been that it has not provided much comfort.
Though it may, maybe one note of optimism may be the fact that there is in 1908 a consideration specifically of the public interest related to privacy. But I take your point on the history of it. So when we talk about safe harbor, and you have previously written critical of the copyright extension but supportive of embracing safe harbor rules, and I generally side with you in that we shouldn't be talking about imposing liability for content that isn't illegal in the first place. Now, my worry when I read 1917, I think it is, and if I can read it out a little bit here, so that no party shall adopt or maintain measures that treat a supplier or user of an interactive computer service as an information content provider in determining liability for harms, except to the extent the supplier has, in whole or in part, created or developed the information. Now, I don't expect Facebook, Google, or whatever online company that is a host of third-party content to be developing and creating content. Otherwise, of course, liability would attach. My concern is in the promotion of content. So when I see, and I can list off any number of illegal kinds of content, from defamation, harassment, hate speech, disinformation in the context of elections, counterfeit goods that are advertised for sale, shouldn't there be some liability? And is the liability, I guess, limited to the criminal law? There would be criminal law liability, and that would be the way around this safe harbor provision?
Well, I think there's a few things. One, where we're talking about unlawful content, and one of the platforms is made aware of it, I think the answer is yes, there ought to be liability for failure to act.
Would this provision get in the way of that in any way?
I don't think it gets in the way of illegal content. Part of the problem is fake news isn't necessarily illegal content, although we can recognize the harm.
Sure.
And so there's questions about how to address or deal with some of those kinds of issues.
But is that only because it's covered by the criminal law, and there's an exception at paragraph 4 in reference to the criminal law?
Well, the potential applicability here does still cover illegal content. I think it's important to recognize, this language didn't just come out of nowhere, right? It came out of U.S. legislation known as the CDA Section 230 sub C.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we have to guess a lot about how that kind of provision can and will be used. There's 2 decades of jurisprudence in the United States to see precisely how it's used, and it has been used to grant a very broad
And so if I want a law, for example, that says where there is illegal content at a minimum for, say, advertising counterfeit goods, that seems like an obvious thing that shouldn't happen. So where goods are advertised that are counterfeit and Facebook profits from that ad, or YouTube profits from that ad, I would like them to disgorge that funding or those profits in some fashion. I would like a law in place to ensure that happens. That would not be precluded by 230 or precluded by CUSMA.
I think there's a couple of issues there. One is whether or not, whether we're talking about illegal content, to the extent to which you've legislated to render this kind of content illegal, and it sustains a potential charter challenge,
Sure.
then you're okay on that front. Bear in mind, you switched quickly to say, well, if it's a Facebook ad. And so oftentimes what we are talking about here within this context, though, isn't necessarily the advertising that Facebook might be profiting from, but rather the third-party content that is posted by users. That's where a lot of the attention has been focused.
Themselves content posted by
Unfortunately,
third-party users.
Mr. Smith, unfortunately, that's your time. We now move to Mr. Massey.
Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. To Mr. Geist, I'm going to continue. One of the things I was hoping the Americans would have put on the table for us is crown copyright. They don't have crown copyright, but now we're in a situation, so we're looking at either we accept this deal, there have been some improvements from the Democrats in Congress from the original one that was drafted, or we continue under status quo. The status quo is what we have now, and it really, there's quite a debate about whether or not Trump could even pull that on his own out, and then we'd actually reverse to the free trade agreement. There's a whole process in place. There's quite a legal debate about what and how that would go, but we're left with a choice now is whether we go ahead or not. And so looking at the 2 options, going ahead is preferable to me, but also too looking at ways we can ameliorate some of the damages that we have. Would crown copyright be one of those small things that we can do? And this is the elimination. I've tabled that again in the House of Commons, so that public information data, all our studies that are done here that are now restricted, Canada is the only country that does that, if I'm aware of. Our law is based from 1909 from the United Kingdom, and has been updated in 1911. So if we were to abolish Crown Copy to provide more public access to research and other government documents, would that be a thing that would at least have a small benefit to deal with some of the restrictions we have on information and changes we might get here?
Right. Well, thanks for the question. I mean, yeah, I'm in agreement with the private members bill that you've put forward, and I think there are many from across the country, from a wide range of areas, that are concerned about the continued use of Crown copyright. I guess I would say this: this committee, I thought, did exceptional work as part of the copyright review, and I recognize not everybody around the table was part of that review, although some were. And I would say that it provides the roadmap for action for this government. In particular, if we are to move forward on a number of issues that I think would be widely recognized as measures that weren't things Canada was looking for, but basically we have to take because it's part of the deal. So term extension is one. Some of the expansion on digital locks with criminalization would be another.
Yep.
It seems to me that recognizing the need for balance in copyright would suggest that one of the things that the government ought to be doing is seeking to try to restore some of that balance. And so Crown copyright's one way to do it. Digital locks is another. Full flexibility, frankly, with fair use or a flexible fair dealing provision. All things recommended through the industry committee's copyright review are the sorts of things that I think would help restore the balance. I think it would be in our broader interests as well. And we don't necessarily need a trade agreement, of course, to do it. But given that we have this 30-month period, we ought to be using that 30-month period both to get the term extension issue right, but I think at the same time recognize that this has created, or this will create, a distortion in the balance of copyright, given that we largely are just acquiescing to some U.S. demands. And so it would be in our interest to restore that copyright balance by looking to the copyright review from the industry committee and looking at some of those kinds of changes: Crown copyright, the registration requirement, digital locks, expansion of fair dealing to a flexible fair dealing approach.
So, yeah, and that's because we spent a lot of time on that. There was a few members that were here, and it was, we went across the country. We just finished it before Parliament broke, so we could use that as a roadmap. Any other, I guess I did ask a question earlier about our privacy commissioner. I guess I just want to make sure that, is there any risk in this agreement of our privacy commissioner and decisions of the privacy commissioner might be challenged? The U.S. does not have a privacy commissioner. So it's, I'm worried as well, too, about, we could have, CRTC decisions that are challenged, for example. You may not have an answer for that now, but the U.S. not having a privacy commissioner, I guess I'm just wondering what.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I guess my instinct is to say that unlike some of the broadcast and telecom issues coming out of the Yale report that would largely be enforced by the CRTC, which I do think would be subject to challenge. So if you put in a licensing system for news aggregators online and mandate that they have to pay levies, that does strike me as the sort of thing that the CRTC would enforce and would create the possibility of challenge. The issue on the privacy side, though, and this points to the weakness of our privacy laws, is that the privacy commissioner's decisions are simply findings and they are not enforceable. And so I think the privacy commissioner could issue a finding that ostensibly runs afoul of the agreement. I think the initial response would be, well, nobody has to actually abide by it. If it's merely a finding, you actually need a court order to be able to do that, which I think points to an area that I hope this committee takes up with earnest over in the coming months. Which is to ensure that we've got better privacy laws that include the kind of enforceability that I guess, in theory, might lead to the potential for a challenge if there was an issue that was offside.
So if our privacy, we won't know until we try to craft stronger privacy laws whether they could be challengeable under this new agreement, because right now it's not likely to be challengeable because our privacy laws aren't strong enough by the way they're written.
Well, as I say, I don't think a privacy commissioner's decision would be challengeable because it's not enforceable. As for what our privacy laws look like, the agreement speaks of privacy laws, but it's very, very flexible in that regard. So it even incorporates some of the lower U.S. standards that we see in many places in the United States as meeting the standard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and that is all the time that we have today. So I'd like to thank the witnesses again for their time and their testimony. Merci beaucoup pour votre temps ainsi que votre témoignage. And with that, can I have a motion to adjourn? Sure. Adjourned. Thank you. you.